Diane Lister, the Honourable Mrs. Wyndham, was a British aristocrat and socialite from a prominent family, and in 1918 she married Arthur Capel. Her lineage and connections made her an ideal match for Capel in the eyes of Edwardian society, and his decision to marry Diana reflected his adherence to societal expectations despite his long-standing and passionate relationship with Chanel. In later life, Chanel did not discuss her lover's marriage to Diana. In fact, she barely acknowledged that it had taken place. Perhaps this is how she dealt with it at the time. She already knew that he had other women, other mistresses, and it seemed evident that nothing would come of his earlier promises that she would be his wife. Capel was ambitious, and an aristocratic wife would consolidate his social standing in a way that Coco Chanel could not. Diana's reference to him as my darky, which she wrote in a letter one time,
Excuse
might
me?
yeah.
You would not, sorry?
Yeah, she wrote this in a letter to one of her lovers, might suggest that his childhood background was still a talking point. Of course, Chanel was also ambitious, as was evident in her ascent through Parisian society. She'd gone from milliner to dressmaker to courtiere. Co- Yep, and was now admired by baronesses and princesses. She had climbed from the half-light of the demi-mondaine to the spotlight of worldly acclaim. But for all her commercial and social successes, Chanel did not yet understand the unwritten code of the British upper classes, nor boys' adherence to its conventions and etiquette. Despite his apparently carefree enjoyment of Paris, many years later, Chanel told Bettina Ballard that during her affair with Boy, she had yearned for the romance of the sticky French sentimental novels she read, but she thought it demonstrably absurd that making this clear by subverting the rituals of an adorning love affair. After she complained that he never gave her jewelry, he bought her a tiara from Cartier, but she didn't understand what it was or how to wear it. He knew so much more than I did. I jumped at him furiously, pounding my fists on his chest and crying, "What is it? Why do you tease me? Why do you make me feel ridiculous?" She gave a similar account to Paul Morand and of the consequences of asking Boy to send her flowers. Half an hour later, I received a bouquet. I was delighted. Half an hour later, a second bouquet. I was pleased. Half an hour later, another bouquet. This was becoming monotonous. Every half hour, the bouquets kept arriving in this way for 2 days. Boy Capel wanted to train me. I understood the lesson. He trained me for happiness. And yet she was not happy. When Chanel sought advice from a friend about the tiara, she discovered that it should be worn to the opera, but this was not possible as Capel rarely took her out with him in public. Thus did our happy days pass at Avenue Gabrielle, she told Morand. I hardly ever went out. I dressed in the evening to please Capel, knowing full well that there would shortly be a moment where he would say, "Why go out? After all, we're very comfortable here." So there they stayed, surrounded by the coromandel screens he had introduced her to, and which she came to adore in part because, like medieval tapestries, they allowed her to recreate her home wherever she might move to. He liked me among my surroundings, and there's a girl from the harem side of me that suited this seclusion very well. Um,
Okay, so he's lavishing her with affection.
yeah,
Yeah,
but not
and
marrying her.
but not marrying her. She's not the marrying type, and he
Hmm.
needs to secure his status. You see, you're telling me this Englishman is obsessed with status. Is that what you're telling me,
Yeah,
Abby?
yeah.
Never unheard of. But but also like kind of who could blame him? I mean, it's the
Hmm.
time.
He had
What do you?
business interests.
Sure, and at a certain point, they do start looking at you funny if you're not bringing a wife around. You're not doing your duty to society. So, so he submits to that, but and she must have mixed feelings about this. Correct?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, it's fair,
Um,
reasonable.
Capel and Diana would have a child named Anne in 1919, and he would continue his affair with Coco, whilst his wife indeed had affairs with others as well. So not just him. What happened next was the event that Chanel defined as marking her forever. The deepest cut to her heart, the wound that would not heal. Although she never revealed the precise details of the tragedy, and they have tended to be misreported, an outline of the truth can be pieced together through diaries, letters, newspaper reports, and Chanel's own testimony. On the 22nd of December 1919, Captain Arthur Capel was killed in an accident while driving from Paris to Cannes. According to the Times and Reuters, he was traveling with his mechanic, a man named Mansfield, when one of the tires burst on his car. The mechanic was seriously injured. Capel himself was to be buried on Christmas Eve in Fréjus, just inland from Saint Raphael on the Côte d'Azur. When the word of Boy's death reached Paris, one of Chanel's friends
Oh
from
my
her days at
God.
Royal U, Leon de Laborde, volunteered to break the news to her. It was late at night by the time he arrived at her villa in St. Cloud, and it took some time for the butler to come to the front door. Mademoiselle was sleeping, he said, but Laborde insisted that she be woken. When Chanel came down the stairs, he later recalled she was wearing white pajamas and her short hair was tousled, the silhouette of an adolescent, a youth in satin. He told her that Boy was dead, and her face crumpled in agony, but there were no tears. The worst of it, said Laborde, was this woman crying with dry eyes. Then she packed a bag and he drove her through the dawn to the south of France until they reached the Riviera where Capel's sister Bertha was staying in a suite of rooms in a palace hotel. Like her brother, she had married well, indeed, he had seen to it, thereby acquiring a large income and the title of Lady Michelin. Bertha offered Chanel a bed to sleep in, but she said no, still dry-eyed, and sat up all night on the chaise lounge. Boy's body was burnt beyond recognition and had already been sealed in a coffin before Chanel's arrival. She did not want to go to the funeral. Instead, she asked Lady Michelin's chauffeur to drive her to the scene of the accident. According to the driver, Chanel stood by the wrecked car, which had not yet been moved from where it had crashed on the side of the road, and touched it with her hands as if it were a living creature. Then she sat down and wept, and this time the tears overflowed.
Now I remember this. I remember this incident in her life. So double tragedy in a sense. He marries another woman
Hmm.
and then not long after he dies, a few years later in a car accident.
Like a year and a half
Yeah,
later or
just
something.
enough to have a baby and
Yeah.
what a horrible tragedy.
Mm.
Mm.
In
That's
Losing
so
Boy.
sad. So sad.
Yeah.
I'm really sad for her. She's had so much already. It's like, come
Yeah.
on, go on, go on.
It's
All right.
super extremes, her life. In Losing Boy, Coco lost everything, although he continued to provide for her in death. The majority of his estate went to Diana and his daughter. However, there was enough for Chanel to expand 21 Rue Cambon and to buy a villa, Belle Rispero, in Garches in the western outskirts of Paris. She manifested her bereavement by ordering that Belle Rispero was to be painted beige on the outside, but with its windows shuttered, lacquered in black, so that when the shutters were fastened, it was as if the eyes of the house were closed. In her previous house in St. Cloud, where Capel had visited her, she had commanded that her bedroom be decorated in black, walls, ceiling, carpet, sheets, all the color of mourning in memory of her dead lover. After only one night, however, she changed her mind, giving instructions to the decorator to redo it in pink and telling her butler, "Get me out of this tomb." Chanel identified the origins of what would come to be known as the Little Black Dress as being around this time in 1920.
So she
Um,
originated the little black dress. Is that what you're telling me?
yeah.
Thank
Um,
thank God for Coco Chanel. I think I speak for all men everywhere. A significant portion of men,
yes.
the majority, the silent majority. That's what I speak for when I say thank God for Coco
Thank you for
Chanel's invention of the little black dress. That is wild. Okay, go on. I want to hear this.
out of
So,
her bereavement. Um, At about that time, I remember contemplating the auditorium at the opera from the back of the box. She understood her own mind by then. She did not need anyone to tell her that a tiara should be worn to the opera, and she did not approve of what she saw before her. Those reds, those greens, those electric blues, brought into fashion by her great rival, Paul Poiret, made me feel ill. At that moment, or so she said to Morand, Coco made a vow to herself. These colors are impossible. These women, I'm bloody well going to dress them in black. I imposed black. It's still going strong today, for black wipes out everything else around. But Coco Chanel was not wiped out. She was not consumed in the wreckage at the end of her affair with Boy Capel. She moved onwards, propelled into the Jazz Age, even propelling the age forward in her own image, carrying other women with her in her wake, out of the past and into the future, wearing black as a symbol of strength and freedom.
Black has never gone out of fashion since. Well, look at us. I mean, it's
Look at us.
you cannot go wrong. I remember when I was living in New York and I went to LA a few times, and I'd show up in LA and you realize you could spot the New Yorkers because
Because they're all wearing black.
all in black and they're not goths, you know. And the
Yeah,
and the Los Angelinos would go, "Oh, you're from New York," or it was the whole thing. It was that difference, you know. But it's true. I mean, you really can't if you're putting together a wardrobe in a really modest budget. It's you know, if you had to pick one thing to stick to, it's black.
it's black.
It's black. Okay, we're with her on this.
We're with her.
Hmm.
So, before this becomes a show about her boyfriends, uh, it's important to acknowledge.
Abby Lucas fails the Bechdel test once again on Art of Darkness. Not that we care.
Um, there were some important female and platonic relationships in Coco's life, and one of the most important would be her long-term frenemy, Misia Sert. Misia Sert was born Misia Godebska, as she was a Polish aristocrat, muse, and patron of the arts, married to the Spanish painter and art collector Jose Maria Sert. She was a leading figure in the Parisian avant-garde circle in the early 20th century, moving in the same elite social spheres as Chanel, and their friendship would prove to be a vital part of Chanel's artistic and emotional development. Chanel and Misia first met in the early 1910s, and the connection between them was immediate and powerful. They had met at a dinner party at the home of an actress who was a client of Chanel's. Misia went straight to Rue Cambon the following morning in search of the woman who had so enchanted her. In her little boutique, one found sweaters, hats, and accessories of all kinds. When I arrived, two women were talking about her, calling her Coco. I didn't know why the use of this name upset me so, but my heart sank. I had the impression that my idol was being smashed. Why trick out someone so exceptional with a so vulgar a name? I was indignant. And then Chanel herself appeared, the woman I had been thinking about since the night before. Misia started talking to her and did not stop. Chanel hardly spoke a word. Magically, the hours sped by. The thought of parting from her seemed unbearable. That night, Misia and Jose Maria Sert, a flamboyant Spanish painter, as we said, who was to become Misia's third husband, went to dinner at Chanel's apartment. There, in the midst of countless Coromandel screens, we found Boy Capel, who represented important British interests in Paris. But Misia only had eyes for Chanel, to such an extent that her lover, who, like Capel, had his own petite amies, was somewhat discomfited. Sert was really scandalized by the astonishing infatuation I felt for my new friend. I was not in the habit of being carried away like this. Misia was known for her intellectual and artistic sensibilities, her association with key figures like composers Eric Satie and Igor Stravinsky, and her role as a patron of artists like Jean Cocteau, Pablo Picasso, and Sergei uh, Diaghilev.
Okay,
Diaghilev.
and here we get to our point in the episode where we say there's only 25 to 50,000 people alive at any given time because somehow now we're at the point where Coco, I guess she's going to meet everybody, right? She's going to meet
Oh,
Stravinsky
just
and Picasso and yeah. Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just need to check that yours is still recording because mine has run out of sufficient space.
Ah, I see. Well, mine is still recording, so
Okay.
rest easy, rest easy. I will
All
keep it.
right.
This is why we make backups. Do you need you're going to need an external drive, Abby. You
I
need
have
your
one somewhere. I just need to
Okay,
plug it
no
in.
worries. Okay,
Right.
but I'm glad you checked. It's very
Yes.
important. Yeah, you don't want to record a 5 hour
I
core episode and
no.
then drop it. That would be a disaster.
Yeah.
So no, but let's just trust that I'll keep a close eye on mine. Okay.
Okay.
And by the way, I'm
Me.
not I'm not editing any of that out. I don't care. Like it's just
Okay.
this is the
But yeah.
podcast. You listen to it.
This
This
is
is this
real
is Art of
life.
Dark. This is yeah. You're this is IRL. We're doing this show. We're doing this show because we love you. We're doing this show because we want you to. We love. I love hearing from people who come to us after listening to the show and go, I started reading The Divine Comedy, or
Hmm.
because of you, I started reading David Foster Wallace, or it's just the best. It really, really is. I would do this for nothing. And it's really really cool. It's also just fun to do. And you, Abby, the green room before we started, you had nerves. How are you feeling? You see how what I'm saying? Once you get going,
Yeah,
it's
I'm
easier.
a little
Yeah,
bit more relaxed now.
yeah,
But
okay.
yeah,
Just
my only nerves is how long this might be.
listen, people, that's one thing about Art of Darkness is that people love it good, long, and hard. They really do. They do. When we drop a 5 hour episode, that will be the first thing everybody notices. It'll be what 5 hours on you know, Hunter S. Thompson, put it right into my veins. I mean, that's our show. That's part of the appeal of the show. Is that like, when Brad and I first started, the first episode was an hour. Then the second episode was
Mhm.
90 minutes. Then the third episode was 90 minutes. Then the next one was Kubrick, I think was the one that finally went like two and a half, three
Kubrick.
hours. And we were like,
Right.
oh, like this show is as much about like the stamina of trying to get as much in as possible and craft a story. And that's our particular niche. I mean, that's what we do. So anyway, you're doing a great job, Abby. No nerves. And everybody support Abby. It's not easy to come in and take, fill the shoes of someone like Brad. And of course, we fully
No.
support Brad and what they're doing. And but I think Abby, you're going to get some love maybe after this, if after this one, if not after the season. I think people will adapt and embrace all of the various things that you bring to the show, and so you can find her at Abby Lucas on Twitter, Abby Lucas, like
Mhm.
George, no relation. Go ahead,
No
Abby.
relation, sadly. Um, the friendship between Chanel and Misia was one of mutual admiration, but it wasn't without its challenges. Their friendship thus had a deep emotional undercurrent, with both women sharing intimate moments of vulnerability. Um, Misia has been my only woman friend, recalls Chanel to Paul Moran 30 years later in an emotionally sour reminiscence that seems to suggest something other than friendship. Thus, she ascribed the catalyst for their relationship, or rather for Misia's intensifying attachment to her, as being the death of Boy Capel. I have seen her appear at the moment of my greatest grieving. Other people's grief lures her, just as certain fragrances lure the bee. Chanel professed herself to be unimpressed by Misia. To others, she was the divine Misia, but apparently not to Chanel. We only like people because of their failings, she said to Morand. Misia gave me ample and countless reasons for liking her. Chanel then proceeded to eviscerate her friend at some length and with apparent relish. Misia is to Paris what the goddess Kali is to the Hindu pantheon. She is simultaneously the goddess of destruction and of creation. She kills and scatters her germs without realizing. She is like the Saint Bernard who brings you back to shore with your head underwater. Clearly, Misia got under Chanel's skin, although Chanel preferred to see herself as tough enough to resist penetration, and Misia as a parasite that could not gain entry. She was never able to find the chink in the armor, which nevertheless exists. For a quarter of a century, the worm has made its way around the fruit without ever being able to get inside it. But before the rivalry, there was sympathy and affection. As Chanel somewhat grudgingly admitted to Morand and turned to Misia, she turned to Misia in Cert, nicknamed Jojo by Misia, after Capel's death, for they were moved to see a young woman weeping her heart out in grief. So began a close relationship that would last until Surt's death, with all the ripples that a clash of characters as entrenched as ours can stir up. Such was the intensity after the Surt's wedding in August 1920 that they took Chanel with them on their honeymoon to Italy. If not a sexual menage a trois, it nevertheless seemed to enthrall all of them.
Frenemy.
Frenemy.
Those are those are some turns of phrase too. Calling your she's like Kali. She's like the goddess or the god Kali. I think
Yeah.
it's the goddess Kali, the destroyer and creator of Paris. Yeah, we've all had this friend. We've all been this friend. I
Yeah.
mean, like, and it's it's tricky. It's tricky. Yeah, I'm sure Coco herself was probably no small pill to swallow as
I
well at times.
yes, I think
Yeah.
Coco may have been a difficult character in many people's lives.
I have a feeling Coco Chanel is the kind of person that like would swallow a room. Let's just say.
Hmm.
Hmm. Yeah. Born on August 19th.
Chanel's initial connection to the Ballet Russes came through Misia, who was one of Diaghilev's closest confidants and a regular fixture in his inner circle. In 1920, Diaghilev was planning a revival of Le Sacre de Printemps, The Rite of Spring, a ballet original premiered in 1913 that caused a scandal with its avant-garde music by Igor Stravinsky and its provocative choreography by Vaslav Nijinsky. The 1920 revival was critical in reintroducing the work to the public, and Chanel played a vital role in making it happen. Stravinsky, who had fallen on hard financial times, received crucial support from Chanel, who helped fund the production and offered Bel Rispero to Stravinsky and his family during the process. Gossip began to spread that Chanel and Stravinsky were having an affair, while his wife Catherine was ailing with consumption in an upstairs room in Bel Rispero. There was no evidence that their flirtation was consummated at Bel Rispero, but whatever the circumstances, they were venturing onto territory as volcanic as the Rite of Spring, a scandal sufficiently enthralling to occupy popular imagination. The ballet's explosive premiere in May 1913 had changed the musical landscape, not only because of Stravinsky's revolutionary dissonant score and Nijinsky's overtly sexual choreography, but also because of the audience response. Brawls had broken out in the aisles of the Paris Theatre while Diaghilev switched the lights off and on in a vain attempt to quieten the clamor, and Nijinsky stood in the wings, shouting out the beats to the dancers as the music was drowned by catcalls and cheers. Debussy had witnessed the original performance and described The Rite of Spring as an extraordinary, ferocious thing, and its composer as a young savage who wears tumultuous lies and kisses ladies' hands while treading on their feet. When he's old, he'll be unbearable. 7 years later, when Chanel met Stravinsky, she appeared equally dismissive, or at least she was in her recollection of him to Paul Morand. He was still not very cosmopolitan, and he was very Russian in his ways, with the look of a clerk in a Chekhov short story. A small moustache beneath a large rat-like nose. He was young and shy. He found me attractive. Stravinsky maintained his silence on the subject, although his second wife was to dismiss the idea that he and Chanel had an affair. While Chanel claimed that she refused to respond to Stravinsky's advances when he embarked upon the pursuit of her, uh, not that this prevented an ensuing drama, at least according to Chanel in her account of the story to Morand. You're married, Igor, I told him, when Catherine, your wife, gets to know. And he's very Russian. She knows I love you. To whom else, if not her, would I confide something so important? Without being jealous, Misia began to spread gossip. She had sensed that something was happening without her knowing. What are you doing? Where are you going? People tell me that Igor walks your dog. Explain yourself. Chanel provided no further explanation of the dog walking episode to Morand, nor to anyone else for that matter, and somewhat disappointingly, Misia's own memoir cast no more light on the affair, although she did refer to Chanel penetrating the famous, carefully guarded game preserve that constituted smart Parisian society at the time, thanks to Misia's introductions, of course. Coco came to know Diaghilev at my house, as well as the whole group of artists that gravitated around the Ballet Russes, and they found in her a faithful, very generous friend. Stravinsky, in particular, fell desperately in love with her. Afterwards, she was to give him a house in Gaucher, and frequent financial help too. It is thought that the act of bankrolling this production was a way for Chanel to one-up Misia, who had been involved with Dagliev and trying to get the performance revived herself.
Abby, how is this film, Chanel and Stravinsky?
I wasn't a big fan of it.
So
The I,
so.
yeah, so. It's quite arty, and I mean the thing that I liked most was Bel Rispero. Like I want to know if it actually looks like the way they had done it in the film. But the actress, I can't remember her name. She sort of just had this like haughty, smug look for the entirety of the film and was kind of swanning around.
It looks like Anna Muglalis or something like that. I don't know if you're saying
Yeah.
that properly. Yeah.
Apparently she was a model for the House of Chanel at some point, but
Yeah, it seems like it didn't do very well, and it had mixed
yeah, not as
reviews.
well as
Yeah.
Coco before Chanel, which came out in the same year.
Oh, really? And
Yeah.
you would say if you're gonna watch one, watch that one.
Yeah, that covers sort of from when she's singing in the bars to well past Boy's death.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that seems
Yeah.
like maybe the one to watch.
Yeah.
And it's French,
And it's French and
which is
Audrey Tattoo of Amelie plays
there
Coco
you
Chanel.
are. Yeah, role of a lifetime.
Um an even clearer signal of Chanel's arrival in the world of the avant-garde art came in 1922 when Jean Cocteau asked her to design some of the costumes for his stage adaptation of Antigone. The production opened in Paris at the fashionably experimental Théâtre d'Atelier in December 1922 with sets by Picasso.
Theatre Atelier.
Atelier.
An atelier. That's where you got to know that much. That's where that's.
Yes, but they pronounced it differently in a French film
I'm sure
that
they
I watched
do.
the other day.
I know. I don't know, and I could be wrong too. Go on.
Yeah, Atelier.
Don't worry. You'll get your
It's
chance to
it was
correct
no,
me.
it was like Atelier.
Atelier. I don't have no idea. I've heard it. Whatever.
Um,
Who knows? Yeah.
anyway, Picasso did the sets. um, and
Oh,
the
so
costumes
she
were
no
by
she so
Chanel.
she's 100% an artist. She's working
Yeah,
with Picasso and Jean Cocteau. I mean, in the theater, the theater.
yeah,
Yeah,
in the
cool.
theater. Um,
Hmm.
but they said because it is impossible to imagine the daughters of the daughters of Oedipus poorly dressed. I
That is
completely blanked.
whole on how to pronounce Oedipus, as you
Oedipus,
say.
yeah.
Oedipus.
I was
Okay,
like,
all
I
right.
know that one. Why is this tripping me up?
No, you know what this is. No, 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 no. I've done enough episodes of this. You do get brain fatigue at around 2.5
Yeah.
hours, 3 hours. You start to go, okay, I see the words on the
Um,
page. Can I communicate the
yeah.
words to the audience? Yeah, you're doing great, Abby.
American and French editions of magazines ran extensive coverage on her designs under the headlines Chanel goes Greek while remaining French and praised her sensitive approach. Chanel's position as a participant in art rather than simply a patron was further consolidated when she designed the costumes for the Ballet Russe's production of Le Train Bleu in 1924, working again alongside Picasso, who created the stage curtain in the program. It was at this crucial point that Misia, whether motivated by real concern or mounting envy, declared that she must protect Chanel from Picasso, as if his magnetism needed her intervention, which caused Chanel such irritation that she was still complaining about it over 20 years later. I had no need of being protected from anyone except Misia, for where has once loved, the grass doesn't grow anymore. Thus, Chanel's relationship with Misia grew murkier, overshadowed by her suspicion that Misia was always scheming, or as she said to Morand, sniffing some dark intrigue.
And again, frenemy. It doesn't get more
Frenemy.
frenemous than this. Yeah, that's wild. But it's like her
But
only.
perhaps she should have been protected from Picasso. I guess we'll find out when
Right. Yeah, we'll find out
when
when
you
we finally cover. Am I doing Picasso?
You're doing Picasso, yeah.
I'm doing Picasso. Okay, all right. Well, there we go. That'll pair very nicely with this episode. Now, I'll be
Yeah.
sure to cover to make sure I mention when Picasso met Chanel and all the rest of it. That'll be fun. I think we're doing that later in this season. Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Can't wait.
The ballet Russes were not the only Russians Coco was financially backing at the time. Once a kept woman, it seems that Coco was now so wildly successful that she was able to keep men. In the years following the Russian Revolution of
Based,
1917, based,
based. Awesome. Good for her.
a number of Russian aristocrats and intellectuals fled to Paris, and the city became a hub for the Russian immigrant culture. Chanel was romantically involved with several Russian men over the years, including the Russian aristocrat the Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich of Russia, who was related to Tsar Nicholas II. Their affair, although short-lived, further aligned Chanel with the Russian elite and influenced her understanding of Russian culture and aesthetics. But perhaps the most transformative relationship she had with a Russian, though, was what transpired between her and Ernest Beau, which brings us to the invention of Chanel number 5. Paul Valery used to say, this is a quote from Coco Chanel, a woman who doesn't wear perfume has no future. Well, he was quite right. Coco approached the creation of Chanel number 5 with a specific vision. She wanted a perfume that reflected the modern woman, bold, sophisticated, and free from the constraints of convention. At the time, women's fragrances were predominantly floral and singular in their composition, often mimicking the sense of nature. Chanel sought something different, a perfume that embodied the complexity of womanhood, blending natural and synthetic ingredients to create a fully unique, abstract scent. Chanel collaborated with perfumer Ernest Beau, a Russian emigre who had previously been the official perfumer to the Russian imperial court. Beau presented Chanel with several sample compositions numbered 1 through 5 and 20 through 24. Chanel chose the fifth sample not only for its olfactory qualities, but also because the number 5 held personal significance for her. It was her lucky number, and she often launched her collections on the fifth day of the fifth month. Chanel number 5 was revolutionary in its composition. Beau employed aldehydes, a class of synthetic compounds that enhanced the brightness and complexity of the scent. These aldehydes gave Chanel number 5 its distinctive, almost ethereal quality, making it a perfume that smelled unlike anything else at the time. The fragrance was a blend of floral, woody, and powdery notes, including jasmine, May rose, lang lang, sandalwood, neroli, and bourbon vetiver. Its use of aldehydes was groundbreaking and helped to define Chanel number 5 as the truly modern perfume.
She's like a Steve Jobs.
Yeah,
She's
yeah.
she's doing it all. I mean, we're going to do hats. We're going to do women's kind of, daily wear. We're going to do women's formal wear. We're going to do perfume now. I mean, if you live a life and you revolutionize any one of those things, you'll have a noteworthy life. She's already on number, 3 or 4 of major revolutionary things. It's wild.
And she oh, it was around that time, I guess, with her starting a perfume, other fashion houses would do it as well, and it became known as sort of like the insurance policy of a fashion house. So if you had if you had a collection that flopped some season for whatever reason, you would have a fragrance that stayed the same and would continue to bring in money to the company.
Right, because it's your
If the clothes
evergreen.
didn't
It's
sell.
right. It's never going to
Yeah.
change. It's a high margin item.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, and of course, once somebody gets hooked on it, that's my scent. That's what I
Yeah.
wear. Yeah, it's a very scent is primal, and it's very. I mean, yeah, I find myself doing the same thing. I've worn. I go back and I shop around and I go pick up the exact same thing I've worn for years. Because of a variety of reasons. Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Huh.
I
Interesting.
wear Chanel number 5.
And there you heard it here first, folks. And if you come hang out with us in London, you will have evidence of that, right? But I listen, as long as nobody's smelling hair, we don't want
Yeah.
to keep enough distance. It's so funny. His father, Papa, hated the smell of hair. Like what a quirk, what a strange, unfortunate thing. No, that's great. That's great, Abby. When did you start wearing Chanel 5?
Well, so when I was 16, for whatever reason, I had decided that Gucci Envy was the scent that I was going to wear, and my mother had bought me my first bottle of it just before I went to my fifth form ball. So I had the dress and the bottle of Gucci Envy, and I wore that for quite a while, and then when I was around the age of 20 and met uh, this guy that who would turn out to be the longest relationship that I had, he wore the Gucci Envy men. And so it was sort of this like magical thinking type thing. And around the time that we broke up, Gucci Envy got discontinued. And
Oh, oh,
I it got discontinued. And I felt like part of my identity had been discontinued because so many people knew that perfume to be the perfume that I wore. And I went on a work trip to Paris, and I bought a bottle of Chanel number 5 eau de toilette, and I bought a red lipstick, and rebuilt myself and was
and that's been
determined
there you
that
go.
no one would discontinue me ever again.
What a touching personal story. But this is good. This is getting at my point about scent being primal and it's part of identity and everything. Yeah, fascinating. Okay, good to
Yeah.
know, Abby. Good to know. Classic
Yeah.
choice. Hard to go wrong.
Patreon.com/of Darkness Pod because Chanel number 5 is expensive.
Now you're getting it. Now you're understanding. Yeah, so it's patreon.com/art of dark pod to help keep Abby in Chanel number 5 until she finally turns 35.
Till that awful day that I turned 35.
All right, very good, very good.
Um,
Okay, so go on.
Chanel was also very good with her viral marketing strategies, as we mentioned earlier before, with her hats. And so, um, as soon as she got her hand on the first vial of Chanel number 5, she took it to a party and was spraying everyone with it. And then all of her rich friends, of course, wanted to buy the perfume. Misia, of course, would try to insert herself into the legend of Chanel number 5 by writing in her memoirs that the perfume was her idea. But apparently, Chanel had a pre-copy of these memoirs and told her to take that section out. But Chanel number 5 would not be what it is today without the help of Pierre Wertheimer, the man who, with his brother Paul, would back Les Parfums Chanel into a global sensation. But we'll find out more about that in the After Dark, um, on Patreon and Substack.
Very good. Yeah, no, good. I like you're keeping some more of these rivalries for the After Dark. That's good. Yeah, because somebody operating at her level is not going to just have smooth sailing her entire life. She's going to
Oh
butt
no.
up against other personalities, and they're going to butt up against her. And yeah, I
And
love the
her tongue was famously acid, so
yeah. Well, I think we've already got a taste of that. She was calling her friend Kali. I like the elegance of naming your marquee perfume, right? Your flagship, calling it number 5, because numbers 1 through 4 don't exist, but it
Mhm.
suggests that they do, but of course they don't. And it's just, I don't know, it's very elegant and clean. Remove the Facebook. Remove the from the Facebook. Just call it
Yeah,
Facebook. It's cleaner.
Facebook.
Cleaner. Yeah, Chanel number 5. It's iconic. Yeah, it's beautiful. She obviously had tremendous taste. I mean, of
Yeah.
course. Yeah, cool. Very modern. Très
Um,
chic.
Trishik. So another important woman in Chanel's life kind of comes in at this point. Born Vera Nina Arkwright in 1883, Vera Bate Lombardi was a well-known figure in high society, moving effortlessly between the worlds of British and European elites. Initially, she was married to an American, Fred Bates, and she would later marry the Italian aristocrat Guido Lombardi, granting her the title of Marchesa Lombardi. Vera became one of Chanel's close friends and an essential ally during the 1920s, at a time when Chanel was seeking to expand her influence, particularly amongst British high society. Vera was instrumental in introducing her to key figures, including members of the aristocracy and the royal family. For a time, Vera served as a kind of ambassador to the House of Chanel, promoting the brand among the wealthy and the influential. Her refined taste and insider status in the upper echelons of society made her a perfect representative. Vera's endorsement of Chanel's work added a layer of aristocratic credibility, helping to position Chanel's designs as symbols of modern luxury and exclusivity. Chanel described it thus to Paul Morand: I have employed society people not to indulge my vanity or to humiliate them. I would take other forms of revenge, supposing I would seek them, but because they were useful to me and because they got around Paris working on my behalf. In December of 1923, Vera and Coco were in Monte Carlo for the Christmas season, at which point a man joined their table and invited Coco to dine with him on his yacht. This man was Hugh Richard Arthur Grosvenor, the second Duke of Westminster. Grosvenor was known within his family circles as Bendor, which was also the name of the racehorse Bend Or, owned by his grandfather, the first Duke. The Duke was described as a pure Victorian who had eyes for his shotgun, his hunters, his dogs, a man who enjoyed diamonds under the pillow of his mistresses. He was known for being very conservative and later right-wing. During the run-up to the Second World War, he supported various right-leaning and anti-Semitic causes, including the Right Club. His anti-Semitic rants were notorious. So if you've played the British version of Monopoly, you'll know that the priciest squares on the board are Park Lane and Mayfair. And the Duke of Westminster's family, the Grosvenors, built Mayfair, essentially. And the area is still owned and managed by the Grosvenor Group today, the company being run by Hugh Richard Louis Grosvenor VII and current Duke of Westminster. Um,
Okay. I'm hearing old money.
Old money.
Old money.
Yeah.
Good to know. Okay. Yeah. And Brad and I used to say this, and I'm going to say this again in the Abby Lucas era. We will fly private.
Oh, yeah, definitely fly private.
Yeah, just all you have to do is ask. But even business
Yeah.
class. Coach. I'll fly coach.
I am flying premium economy tomorrow, and you know what? That's luxurious. On a
Incredible.
26-hour flight, you know,
Uh-huh. Yeah, I understand. And Mayfair, of course, is in London, and Grosvenor is it's spelled
mhm,
Grosvenor, correct? Okay, but
that is
the
correct.
S is silent. Okay,
Yeah.
fascinating. Yeah, old money.
Old money, Benny
Hmm.
Bendor. So, Benny Bendor's ancestral country estate in Cheshire, the 54-bedroom Eaton Hall, consisted of 11,000 acres of parkland, garden, and stables. The main residence included paintings by Goya, Rubin, Raphael, Rembrandt, among others. The Duke owned lodges in Scotland and France, all dedicated to the sport of hunting. According to his Times obituary in July 1953, he was busy up to the day of his death in great schemes of afforestation in Cheshire, in the Lake District, and in Scotland. He owned two yachts, the Cutty Sark, which is mentioned in Noel Coward's play Private Lives, and the Flying Cloud. He owned 17 Rolls-Royce motor cars and a private train designed to facilitate travel from Eaton Hall directly into London, where his townhouse Grosvenor House was located. But back in Monte Carlo in 1923, Westminster joined Vera and Chanel at their table and promptly issued the invitation to his yacht. Chanel accepted, later telling a convoluted version of the story to Paul Morand. In this account, she changed Vera's name to Pamela, perhaps because by this time that she was having the conversations with Moran, she'd fallen out with Vera, and declared that their entire transaction was down to money. According to Chanel, Vera Pamela said to her, "Do me a favor, it won't cost you anything. If you do it for me, I shall be given a present. Westminster has just arrived. His yacht is lying at anchor off Monaco. He wants to meet you. I have promised in exchange for a reward to take you to dine there." Chanel was amused by such plain speaking and said, although not surprised, "I was accustomed to Pamela, accustomed to seeing women purely as monsters." If Chanel saw women as money-grabbing monsters, then she may also have had mixed feelings about her lover at the time, the Grand Duke Dmitri, who was dependent on her for financial support, as were a variety of others, as we mentioned. As was clear from her first dinner with Westminster, her substantial wealth was entirely eclipsed by his. For here was a man, like Boy Capel before him, who could provide her with absolute financial security, even if she chose not to accept it, yet whose fidelity could never be guaranteed. Chanel's hesitation for several months before embarking on an affair with the Duke is suggestive, amongst other things, of her uncertainty when faced with this complex equation of loss and gain, or the unanswerable question of whether love, like money, could be counted upon. In the end, she told Claude Delay she favored Westminster over Dmitri. "I chose the one who protected me best, and she could never fully trust either. There were good reasons not to do so. Both men were incorrigible womanizers, and yet perhaps there was something in their lack of commitment that was familiar to her. After all, despite the determination with which she had obscured her origins, Chanel remained her father's daughter, bearing the name and legacy of a man who had vanished from her life, a man who had broken his promise and her belief that he would return, having made his fortune."
He's found
So,
another hyper wealthy old English. I mean, this is even another level up from Boy. This is something else.
mhm,
Yeah.
something else entirely.
Mm, sure.
um, Coco would spend 10 years being the mistress of the Duke of Westminster, and I think she met him when she was 40-ish,
Mm, okay.
or,
So maybe
25.
maybe the wall, all this talk about the wall is bullshit.
Maybe.
Maybe. Maybe.
Well,
I guess it depends. It depends on how.
or maybe Benny Bendor could just have multiple women on
Oh, that's
his
true. Yeah, maybe
multiple yachts.
he's getting multiple things. He's getting different things from different women. But yeah, listen, you got to give Coco some credit there. I mean, if you're becoming a mistress at 40 plus, I mean, you're keeping it together. Let's just say that.
Yep.
Yeah, good for
Yeah.
her. She must have been wonderful company too, and just
Yes, I think
a spark plug. Yeah,
for
fun to
sure.
be around. Yeah, fun to be around. Probably had lots of ideas about a lot of different things. And I love
Indeed.
to, again, like, think about how much somebody appreciates it. The sweet spot is to come from just enough of the middle class where you sort of like you can maneuver between classes, so you can
Hmm.
code switch and talk to the upper reaches about certain things, and then to the other side about certain things. But then to make your own money or to come into money because you appreciate it. Somebody who grows up in a family that's worth $50 million, 5 million, 10 million, it's just like rub it off your shoulders. If you come from like very little
Nothing.
and then you
Yeah.
make it like this, like she walks into every room and she sees it differently than these people.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
and for them too, it's probably appealing because she's clearly smart enough to hang, but it's probably like a chance to see their world anew too through her. You with me? You know how when
Yeah.
somebody's a tourist in your town, you get to kind of see
Yeah.
your town for
Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
first time. Yeah, I have a feeling it's like that, but with class. And then and the fact that she's French too, and these are Englishmen. I just think that dynamic is probably there. They're clearly all getting something out of each other.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to top up my water, Abby. I'm listening.
Okay. Um, Even as she tried to remain aloof, he wooed her with the fruits of his land and his riches, at times quite literally sending baskets of exotic produce that he'd picked himself from his hothouses at Eton, and camellias, gardenias, and orchids from his garden. Once during the Duke's ardent courtship of Chanel, a crate of fresh vegetables was delivered to her in Paris. When the butler unpacked its contents, he discovered a large uncut emerald hidden in the jewel case at the bottom. On another occasion, Chanel's manservant answered the door to find a vast bouquet of flowers hiding the face of the delivery man, and was just about to tip him when he recognized him as Bendor. A few days later, the Duke called on Coco at Rue-Cambon with the Prince of Wales at his side, as if to prove that he was a royal equal, even as he paid court to her. Soon afterwards, she finally succumbed to his charms. By the spring of 1924, Coco and Bendor were an item. He was seen at rehearsals for the Le Train Bleu, the Ballet Russe's production that she designed the costumes for, and she joined him for cruises above the Flying Cloud. A yacht that she later remarked to Claude Delay was by far the best place to begin a love affair. The first time you're clumsy, the second you quarrel a bit, and if it doesn't go well, the third time you can stop at a port. And it did go well, and doors opened for her everywhere. At Eton, she slipped into the role of the chatelaine with the same ease that she wore her silk-fringed evening gowns in sapphire blue or black, designed so as not to crease when they were packed for traveling. She rode and hunted at Eton and accompanied Bendor to the races, and after he bought another Scottish mansion, Rose Hall, in 1926, she decorated it with her characteristic style, introducing what was said to be the first bidet in the Highlands in an ensuite bathroom, with a hand-blocked French wallpaper on the bedroom walls and beige-painted drawing rooms downstairs. "This is a very agreeable house," wrote Winston Churchill to his wife while on a fishing trip to Rosen Hall in May 1928. Only Benny, Coco, and one of his ADCs, Ernest Ball. The air is most exhilarating, keen, and yet caressing. Coco caught 3 fish today. The place is 45 miles from Loch Moor, but both rivers are available. This morning it was raining, which is good for fishing. So in being the mistress of the Duke, Coco was initiated into the upper echelons of British society. Amongst her frequent companions were royalty and prominent politicians such as Winston Churchill. It was a constant juggling act for her to keep up her business while tending to Bendor's demands on her time. So one season he shipped over her seamstresses to Eton so that she could work on her collection and be with him. In early June 1927, it was announced in British Vogue that she would be opening a London house in Mayfair. In February 1929, she signed a deed of sale for 5 acres of land on which her Riviera Villa La Pausa would be built. Situated above the village of Roquebrune, the house enjoys views towards Menton and the French border with Italy on one side and Monaco on the other. Its name refers to the legend that Mary Magdalene paused near here on her journey from Jerusalem following the crucifixion of Jesus. The plot had formerly been part of the hunting grounds for the ruling family of Monaco, the Grimaldis, and contained wild olive and orange groves. The final cost of the villa was 6 million francs, a large sum for the time, and it's not clear whether Chanel or Bendor financed the building and furnishing of La Pausa, but it was built by the architect Robert Streets. Straits?
Okay. Well, I like
And
that.
he had,
Again, I like that you could just see her ratchet up the social ladder. I mean, you're getting
oh
right
yeah,
here, right to the tippy top here by association. I
oh
mean,
yeah.
yeah, from nothing, from a convent.
Yes, and the convent would come into play in this particular scenario. Her original meeting with the La Pausa architect was held aboard the Flying Cloud moored offshore from Cannes. Thereafter, she would take the Blue Train from Paris to Monaco on her lightning visits to the site. Straits was only 28 at the time, and the building was his first substantial commission, but his ambition to build the ideal Mediterranean villa was readily accepted by Chanel. 4 decades later, in conversation with the French journalist Pierre Galland, Straits recalled that the Duke's sole instruction was simple: "I want everything to be built with the best materials and under the best working conditions." Chanel's first request to the architect was significantly more personal. She told him that she wanted him to recreate a large stone staircase in the villa's entrance hall from the original that she remembered from her childhood at Aubezine. So, as to be sure that the details are exact, she dispatched him to visit the abbey, an extraordinary request given Chanel's obliteration of the orphanage from her previous accounts of her past. In Aubergine's streets found the staircase just as she described it, its steps worn from centuries of footfalls, rising out of the darkness of the abbey to the first floor where generations of monks had walked, followed by the orphans behind them. He was sufficiently discreet never to repeat the exact details of the conversation with the Mother Superior of the convent, who still recalled Gabrielle Chanel from her days in the orphanage. But having studied and photographed the staircase in the abbey, he designed a precise replica for La Pausa, which became the centerpiece of the house. A design
Wow.
of
So
five.
she's just saying she's giving a middle finger in a way. She's like she's trying to remember where she came from.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah, that is a boss move,
Yes, but I guess admitting it to no one except this architect who was sworn to secrecy.
right? So somewhere deep in her heart, she remembers where she came from.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Cool. Again, like a fairy tale.
Um, So the design of five windows is repeated throughout the house in tribute to her perfume Chanel Number 5. She bought more than 20,000 curved tiles for this from surrounding homes for the roof and furnished the house sparsely in shades of white and beige. It was guests of Chanel's at La Pausa included Stravinsky, Picasso, Salvador Dali, and Luchino Visconti. The poet Pierre Reverdy, one of I'm gonna call one of Chanel's minor lovers, stayed at La Pausa for long periods during the 1930s, and the poet Paul Aribe, another one of Chanel's lovers, collapsed and died while playing tennis with Chanel at La Pausa in 1935.
Oh, please. Yeah. Playing tennis. Okay. Yeah. I believe that. I don't. That's of all the fibs, that's the one I don't believe.
That they were playing tennis. There was a tennis court.
I'm sure there was. I mean, listen, if you're going to go out, you want to go out playing tennis, okay? All right.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, 100%.
As long as you're not the one who has to explain it later.
Yeah, right. Well, that is one
Yeah,
of
you
the
want to be the
nice
one
things.
going out. Yeah.
Sure, right, right. Well, one of the nice things about your own death is that you don't have to attend your own funeral.
Aribe and Chanel shared the same reactionary politics, Chanel financing Aribe's monthly ultra-nationalist and anti-Republican
Oh,
newsletter,
oh, she's
Le
already in
Chamois.
it. Oh, so
Oh, yeah.
she's
Oh, yeah.
already in like hard right politics. Okay.
Bandor.
Right. Okay. By
um,
association. I got you.
yeah.
Okay. And she's not. Okay. I see. So this is interesting because I would have kind of assumed, okay, well, the occupation happens and she kind of just goes along with it. It's like, no, she was like ready for them to. Okay. Fascinating. Go on.
Although this next little bit is a tiny bit contradictory. So, Le Témoin was, which encouraged the fairer foreigners and preached anti-Semitism. Oh no, that was definitely in line with her views. In 1936, 1 year after it ceased publication, Chanel veered to the opposite side of the ideological continuum by financing a different radical left-wing magazine called Futur.
So she's
I
just
think she was just
capricious
financing
or.
things. I don't
Yeah. I
know.
don't know. She probably just had
I think
friends
people
and.
she liked came to her and were like, fund this ballet, fund this
Right.
magazine.
Right. Yeah, I wonder too if there
um,
was some maybe advertising. I don't know.
oh
Who
yeah,
knows?
maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
hard to say.
Back to her affair with Bendor. The angry sound of arguments between the Duke and Chanel began to disturb the peace of La Pausa, waking up the other guests in the night. And when she joined him on the Flying Cloud, the rows continued, always about his infidelities and her humiliation. Once, when Bendor tried to make amends for an affair that Chanel had discovered by giving her a large emerald, she accepted it and then, without a word, let it slip from her hands into the sea. On another occasion, when they'd been cruising along the Riviera for several days, the Duke gave her a pearl necklace as a peace offering for having flirted with a younger woman. Again, Chanel simply threw it into the waves. By the end of 1929, it was clear that Bendor was determined to find a new wife who could bear him a son. At 46, Chanel looked remarkably youthful, and it's likely that the Duke believed her to be younger than she was, And their affair was not yet over. Chanel came to stay with him at Eton in mid-December 1929, for example, and was photographed at his house party and shoot. But Bendor took little time in proposing to a young English woman, Layla Ponsonby, less than a month after meeting her at a London nightclub. They were engaged just before Christmas, a day or two after Chanel's visit to Eton, and married in February 1930. So once again, always the mistress, never the bride. um,
Always the mistress, never the bride. Listen, typecast again. You
Typecast
know,
again.
yeah, it's tricky. It's tricky because at this point too, like does she want to be married? I mean, maybe she does. I don't know. She's in her 40s.
Yeah,
I
I
mean, I
mean,
guess. I don't know.
yeah, yeah. Later in life, there would be things that she said that suggested that she wished she had been married.
Kind of had missed it. Okay. All right.
Mm.
Okay. I'm sympathetic to that.
Um,
But at the same time, one wonders like just what her life would have looked like if she had been married. It's almost impossible to imagine a life of this
yeah.
trajectory
How
with
do you
that.
do this
Right.
if
Yeah. I
your
mean, if you're
husband
like,
is like, give up these silly clothes, we
of
need to.
course. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah. Or like
unless she married one of these Russians she was supporting financially,
something. Yeah. Hmm.
something.
Interesting. Okay. All right.
As the legend goes, Bendor had once proposed to Coco, and she refused with the famous declaration, "There have been many Duchesses of Westminster, but only one Coco Chanel." In fact, this is a myth. Just as her legends about childhood with the aunts, and in old age, when asked about the antidote, she denied having anything to do with its origin, declaring it to be far too vulgar for her to have uttered such nonsense to Bendor. He would have laughed in my face if I had ever said it. A more likely starting point came from a conversation that she had at lunch with a diplomat, Sir Charles Mendel, at the British Embassy in Paris. When he asked why she had turned down Westminster's proposal, she replied that there are so many duchesses already, to which he adds chivalrously, and there's only one Coco Chanel. Although their relationship did not produce a child, the heir that Bendor desperately sought, and which would have almost certainly resulted in their marriage, it did create something of significance of which ghostly traces remain. The graceful Chanel interiors at Rose Hall are crumbling now, ceilings collapsing as dry rot takes hold of the timbers, shards of broken glass on the subsiding floors, and the French wallpaper fading and the beige paint peeling away. But white azaleas continue to flower in the garden as they did when Mademoiselle strolled there. And if you walk along certain streets in Mayfair, you can still see a number of double C's embossed on the old lampposts, a final emblem of the Duke's gesture towards Coco Chanel, a silent mark of their union and of the melding of British tradition with French couture in a style all of its own. Kevin, do you think Horseboy Bendor was so romantic to have interlocking C's painted on all the lampposts around Mayfair?
I press X to doubt. Doubt.
Westminster City Council would agree with you, and they
Hmm.
offer a far less exciting explanation for the mystery. The CCs simply stand for City Council. It's a nice idea, but no. Martin Lowe, Commissioner of Transportation for the City Council, stated the lamppost didn't actually get installed until the 1950s. The Duke died in 1953.
Okay. All right. We like reminding everybody that half of this episode is bullshit and that you're lost in the myth of the mythic mist of Coco Chanel number 5 here. No, I mean you're painting a very clear picture of the I guess the aggrandizement and the myth making
Mhm.
and the yeah, she's a poster, even though she's not. She's you say somebody we cover as a poster when it's like Bob Marley, right? And she's a poster. But I mean, everybody listening to this right now can go online and order a Chanel branded product and have it delivered within a week, unless you're like in
Oh, yeah.
Antarctica or something or North Korea. So it's just wild, and the myth making does not surprise me, and it tells me a lot about her character that she wants to create these maybe can't get married, but I'm going to be larger than life, right? I never get to
Yeah.
walk down the aisle, but you know,
But the interlocking seas will forever be
right in
painted on
Mayfair.
lampposts in Mayfair.
And somebody's going through Mayfair thinking that's true to this
Yeah, because
day.
I've seen them and they really do look like the Chanel logo. But what never gets mentioned is that there's also a very intricate W for Westminster City Council.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know. All right. Well, and
Um,
maybe I'll take a stroll through Mayfair later this
maybe,
year in
yeah.
March.
You
Yeah.
can
It's
get
beautiful
a
in
photo
March
of
and
the
April.
lamppost.
I should.
Yeah.
Maybe I'll do that for the Art of Darkness Discord. You can go to artofdarkpod.com/Discord. That's where we're hanging out these days. There's a nice gathering of people there. A lot of fun, interesting characters. The kind of people who listen to Art of Darkness are hanging out there. So join us. Good times. Abby, on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being finished, how far are you with the episode? How are you doing?
S- So not finished.
Well, let's listen. Let's keep going as long as it takes to get it done. Leave an hour for
I
the after dark. Yeah.
I was so determined to have a 3 hour episode and it is not headed that way.
People will respect you. You have to stay true to the episode, okay? And I don't have anywhere to be. You don't have anywhere to be. Do you need a break? Do you need 60 seconds at some point to stand up and
Um,
refresh yourself, or are
yeah,
you doing all
I
right?
will just grab some water if you
Yeah,
don't mind, and
not at
then we're
all.
going to get into I guess what will be the meat and potatoes of this discussion.
We're gonna get into the Nazi business when Abby comes back. We're gonna yeah, okay, go. Take a
All
quick
right.
break, Abby. I'll vamp. All right, everybody. I hope you're enjoying this. You can tell the kind of work that goes into preparing an episode, and it's very exciting for Abby to get to do this for the first time. Of course, she was on the famous Bolaño episode that we did a couple of years ago now, and was more recently on the Hitchcock episode. And then at the end of season 4, Brad decides to go and start a show with Aaron and sort of leave the pod. And I'm thinking, okay, who's gonna come in to replace Brad Kelly? Who could possibly replace him? And maybe that's like even the wrong way to frame it, right? It's not even about replacing. It's sort of more like who can sit in the second seat, who could do the format of this show, and Abby was the natural pick. She's done the most core episodes with us. She knows what an Art of Darkness show is like. She's an artist herself, and so I think it's going swimmingly. And I'm happy to vamp so that you can get a little break. Just one more reminder: go to the website artofdarkpod.com. Abby, I'm sure you're bringing in some new listeners. We would
Well,
really,
I hope
and
so.
I yeah, well, you have your own friends and your own network, your own little social circle.
Yep.
We genuinely ask for material support because these episodes don't make themselves. And there's a way to subscribe on Patreon for a year. I think it's like 50, $60, something like that. You set it, you forget it. You get all the bonus content. You get access to the book club, which is bonus content. We do movie watch parties. So that's additional 3 or 4 episodes. We do kind of quarterly postmortems. There's just a ton of stuff behind the paywall that makes it worth it. And the thing I like to say, and I've said over the years, is that even if we didn't do any bonus stuff, I really hope you would just open the wallet, pull out the credit card just for the value that we're giving on these core episodes. And remember, there's a back catalog of 80 of these core episodes, putting the dark rooms aside where we have guests come on and we talk about the subjects we've covered. Like, it's a monster catalog already. And let's assume Abby and I are able to do this, for another 4 years. We'll add another 50 plus episodes
Mm.
to that catalog. The value that we're creating, in terms of like let's just imagine like a young person coming out of college who maybe feels like they missed an arts and culture education. Like this podcast is going to become, and it already is, like this deep end. You can just jump into the deep end starting right from episode 1, or just dive in somewhere where you can relate. Like, oh, wow, I really love Stanley Kubrick. Let me listen to this. And before you know it, you've listened to 20, 30 core episodes, and you're going to have a different understanding of the world and history. So I love doing the show, and Abby, I hope you do too. I hope this time next year when we're doing our David Lynch episode
Oh yeah.
together, I hope we're you still are on board and having a good time. All right. Okay, good. You took a little break, so now we're getting
I
into
took a
what,
little
act
break.
three? We're getting act three. We're gonna go.
Yeah. I
Okay.
act
Yeah. Yeah.
we're in the long dark night of the soul, I
Oh,
think.
yeah, we're the yeah,
We're
okay.
coming up to it. We're
You
coming
could
up
hear
to it.
the boots marching and the goose
Yeah.
stepping and the forbidden mustache is here. So, all right.
I will just briefly touch on, but I'm going to mostly skip it in the interest of time. In the 1930s, Samuel Goldwyn Mayer of Hollywood did entice. Well, it took a lot of arguing, but he enticed Chanel out to Hollywood for the princely sum of $1 million to go and design costumes for some famous stars. She did 3 movies. Hollywood did not interest her. She thought it was vulgar and thought the business was infantile and came back to Paris. So that was a very short-lived film career for Coco Chanel. And so getting on to World War II. Between the accounts of the demonizers and the defenders, the next chapter of Coco's life cannot be reported on absolutely factually, so I'm going to try my best. But what we do know is that she closed her shops at the beginning of World War II. She had an affair with a German. She maintained a residence at the Ritz Hotel, which was also at the time occupied by senior Nazis. She was assigned a Nazi intelligence code name, which was Westminster, which I take offense to. Why did she have to be named after the sky? Like, I think she had significant credits to her own name that she could have had a different code name in the Nazi
You're
regime.
telling me the Nazis were not sensitive to the Bechdel test? Is that what you're
They were
telling me?
no,
The
no,
Nazis were slightly misogynistic? Is that what you're
yeah.
saying? Their worst crime, no doubt. Like,
Well, yeah. Well, her worst crime was that she also tried to take advantage of the Nazi Aryan laws to oust her Jewish partners from the business. Again, I will go over that in the After Dark.
whoa. Whoa.
That
That's
is
pretty
going to be a
dirty.
significant portion of the After Dark episode.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
And also she was not charged by the authorities. So the order of these events and the connections between them are inconsistent in all of the accounts of what happened, but we can try to go into some detail now. So in 1939, at the beginning of World War II, Chanel closed her shops, maintaining her apartment situated above the Couture House at 31 Rue de Cambon. By this point, she had taken over several buildings in Rue Cambon, and so 21 was the original one, and now she's got up to 31, so it's a significant portion of the street. She said that it was not a time for fashion. As a result of her action, 4,000 female employees lost their jobs. Biographer Hal Vaughan, the writer of Sleeping with the Enemy, Coco Chanel's Secret War, suggests that Chanel used the outbreak of the war as an opportunity to retaliate against those workers who had gone on strike for higher wages and shorter work hours in the French General Labor Strike of 1936. In Justine Picardi's book, she said, some of her detractors believed that Chanel was using the war as an excuse to punish her seamstresses for their involvement in the widespread strikes of June 1936, when she had been barred by a picket line from entering her own premises for several days. At one point in the negotiations, Chanel had made an improbable offer to turn the business into a workers' cooperative on the condition that she could manage it. The proposal came to nothing, and the strike was settled. In her conversations with Paul Morand after the war, she gave her own bizarre version of the episode. In 1936, like everywhere else, we had a sit-down strike. Whoever dreamt it up was a genius. It was cheerful and delightful. The accordion could be heard playing all over the house. Her seamstresses, she declared, were better paid than elsewhere, so the strike was not for money, but a heartfelt demand to see more of Mademoiselle. It was a strike for love, a strike for the yearning heart. Given the continuing success of the House of Chanel after the strike, despite mounting competition from Elsa Schiaparelli, it seems unlikely that Chanel would close her business out of revenge or spite, using the war to settle old scores with her employees. When interviewed in later life by her friend Marcel Heydrich, Chanel gave a far simpler explanation. I stopped working because of the war. Everyone in my place had someone who was in uniform, a husband, a brother, a father. The House of Chanel was empty 2 hours after the war was declared.
Wow. Right. I mean, so now, whatever happened in World War I was not resolved, and we're heading toward war again, and it's total war, total existential war for the future of Europe and the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, Chanel was living in the Ritz at the time, and Noel Coward, who was posted to Paris as British liaison officer, would report seeing her go down to the hotel air raid shelter, followed by her servant carrying her gas mask on a cushion. But nothing withstood
That
the
rocks.
German But nothing withstood the German invasion of France in May 1940, and as the soldiers of the Third Reich approached Paris in early June, Schiaparelli joined the great exodus from the city. At the Ritz, Chanel packed her belongings into several trunks marked with her name, which she stored at the hotel and paid her bill 2 months in advance. Her chauffeur had been drafted into the army, and she was advised by his replacement that it would be unwise to make her escape in her Rolls Royce, so it was in her driver's own car that she left Paris. She was accompanied by several of her female employees, including a Madame Aubert, who'd worked for Chanel from the very start and had known her even before then from the days when Coco emerged at Moulin. Somehow the women made the long and arduous journey to the Pyrenees to the house that Chanel had bought for her nephew Andre, close to where her former lover Etienne Bossan was living in quiet retirement. Andre had already departed, having joined the French army at the start of the hostilities, and was soon to be captured as a prisoner of war and sent to a detainment camp in Germany. But his daughter Gabrielle clearly remembers her aunt's arrival in the Pyrenees. She came in a car with her maid and a few other women. One of them was Madame Aubert, so it was quite a job finding places for them all to stay. Auntie Coco had somehow managed to send on her entire gold dressing table set, which had been given to her by my godfather, the Duke of Westminster, and that came to our house separately. What seared itself most vividly onto her memory was Chanel's terrible grief upon hearing of the French surrender to Germany. She was already staying with us at the time the armistice was signed. We listened to the news on the radio, and she wept bitterly. Gabrielle, who was 13 at the time, was old enough to understand the significance of the capitulation. The armistice was signed on the 22nd of June 1940 in the forest of Compiègne, where her great aunt had ridden Etienne Balsan's horses over 30 years before. The humiliating French surrender, orchestrated by Hitler to take place in the very same spot where Germany had been forced to sign the previous armistice in 1918, accepting defeat in the First World War. As the summer passed, Chanel fretted to return to Paris and eventually conceived a plan to make the homeward journey with another friend who had been washed up in the Pyrenees, Marie-Louise Bosquet, whom she had last seen at Count Etienne's costume ball. The two women traveled first to Vichy, where the collaborationist French government of Marshal Pétain and Pierre Laval had established itself. Everyone was laughing and drinking champagne, Chanel recalled in conversation with Marcel Heydrich. The women were wearing flamboyantly big hats, and the seaside resort seemed to be in full swing. Well, I said, it's the height of the season again. The hotels were so packed with guests that Marie-Louise had to sleep on a chaise longue in the linen room, while Chanel was given an airless attic garret. After a night of very little rest, they managed to replenish their supply of petrol and set out for Paris, only to discover that the roads were blocked. Finally, after several detours, they ended up in the mountain spa resort of Bourbon-les-Archambault. The hotels were deserted, and Chanel was able to book a bedroom with an ensuite bath. There she soaked away the dirt of the journey. The water was black when I got out. But by the time they finally reached Paris in August 1940, Chanel felt dirty again. Dirt was to be a recurring image in her subsequent account of what happened when she returned to the Ritz. Indeed, it was how she characterized the entire era of the German occupation of Paris to Pierre Gallant. The period was singularly lacking in dignity. It was a filthy mess. As soon as she approached the main entrance of the Ritz, she was confronted by the sight of German sentries at the door and uniformed officers in the lobby. The main part of the hotel, including her suite overlooking the Palace Vendôme, had been requisitioned for senior military personnel and high-ranking Nazis, among them Marshal Goering. The hotel manager's wife would never forget the sight of Goering opposite the porter's desk, showing off his new diamond-studded baton by Cartier. Chanel's story of what happened next varied slightly in different accounts, but she gave the most detailed version to Heydrich. An assistant manager informed her that she must go to see the German Kommandantur, to which she replied, "What do you mean? All dirty like this? I must change." She instructed the assistant manager to find her a room that she could wash herself. "Then you go to the Kommandantur, say that Madame Chanel has arrived. I will go when I'm clean. I've always been taught that it's better to be clean when someone is asking for something." After some negotiation, a small bedroom was found for Mademoiselle in the top floor of the Rue Cambon wing of the hotel, much lowlier in status than the Place Vendôme building, which was reserved solely for the Germans. The military were not permitted to pass into the Rue Cambon side, and nor could the civilian residents enter the Nazi-occupied section of the Ritz. Meanwhile, a small resistance network was formed amongst a section of the hotel staff which noted the movements of the Nazi leaders between Berlin and Paris. So
Must
her
have been
her
a sight to see your beloved Ritz in Paris. And of course, on the other end of this war, Hemingway would famously liberate the Ritz. That's what he
right.
claimed. Yeah. And have an evening of alcoholism like
As
at
he
the
was wont to
Ritz,
do.
as he was wont to do. It's so interesting. She was living there. Yeah. And you come home
Yeah.
and your house is occupied by
Yeah,
Germans.
so a lot of the I mean, she did horrible things that isn't without any doubt. But a lot of the things that were sort of set against her was that she was living at the Ritz, so she was clearly fraternizing with the Nazis. But they were clearly two separate parts of the hotel, and one could not go into one, and one could not go into the other. So
Hmm.
that was an interesting little detail to find out.
Hmm.
Uh,
They used it as high command. That's where they were hanging out.
Yeah, that was
That's
where all
okay.
the senior Nazis were, and
Yeah,
the
running the occupation. Yeah.
you see pictures of the building with the swastikas, sort of like s roof to
Hmm.
street pavement almost
Yeah. Yeah.
lying down there.
Yep. 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 Shock and awe.
Shock and awe.
Hmm.
Um,
Yep.
Hans Gunther von Dinklage, known as Spats to his friends, which means sparrow, was born in Hanover to a Prussian major and the daughter of a German merchant. His grandfather was the Prussian uh, uh, General Lieutenant George von Dinklage, who was raised into nobility in 1871. He served in World War One in a Prussian regiment, and during the war, Dinklage was promoted to lieutenant and was discharged at an unknown time with the rank of Oberleutnant. Okay, you speak German. It was a different lieutenancy, I think.
What was his,
Oberleutnant.
what's his name? Oba.
Oberleutnant.
Oba.
Oh,
What's this
Oberleut
guy's name? Dinklage?
Dinklage.
Okay, let me
Yeah.
look it up. Yeah.
Um,
Baron von Dinklage. Oh yeah, there.
yes.
Hans Günther von Dinklage. Let's see. He was a yeah, it's saying his
Oberleutnant.
grandfather, blah blah blah. Let me find his career. Da, 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 da. Oh, his Wikipedia is sort of strange. Let me see if I can find
I
that
mean,
rank.
anyway, it's not
Yeah.
important
No, no,
what
no, no.
rank he was.
No, no.
Uh,
It's just literally Oberlieutenant. Lieutenant. That's it. Ober.
Oberlieutenant. Yeah,
Yeah, we
okay.
just
There we
like
go.
yeah. Okay, there you go. Good.
Um,
The first
on the
lieutenant.
12th of
First lieutenant.
first lieutenant. Okay.
Okay, there you go.
On the 12th of May 1927 in Berlin, Dinklage married Maximilian Henriette Ida von Schönebeck, who was of Jewish descent. During this time, it is likely that Dinklage was active as a merchant in Berlin. Um, Starting in 1928, Dinklage supposedly worked in intelligence for the office Ausland Abwehr, the foreign countries slash defense, and later worked for the SD division Ausland. Together with Maximilian's family, her mother's second husband, and her half sister Sibylle, the couple lived in Sanary-sur-Mer from 1928 to 1939. As Maximilian was considered a half Jew in Nazi Germany, the family presented themselves as Nazi victims and mingled with the other refugees within that community. In papers from the French espionage defense, it is alleged that Maximilien entered affairs with naval officers and through this gained information not only about Toulon, but about Bizerte within the French protectorate of Tunisia as well. Her husband pursued his own beneficial affairs. Above all, he was responsible for forwarding the collected intelligence. Spring 1933, he was called to the German embassy in Paris as a trusted man of the Chancellor Hitler to lead the press and propaganda office. Even before the Nuremberg laws came into effect in 1935, Dinklage filed for divorce from his Jewish wife, but continued living with her in Sanary and continued their work together. On Goebbels' orders, Dinklage established the National Socialist propaganda within French borders and began an intelligence service to control the French opposition. Dinklage encoded his correspondence with the ministry using various methods such as direct phone lines, telegraphs, and cipher machines such as Enigma. His activity as a spy was known to the French and the refugees on which he was spying, but they decided not to expose him because they didn't want to risk an unknown successor. His superiors in the Reich Security Main Office were Walter Schellenberg and Alexander Wag. After being exposed as a spy in 1934, Dinklage accepted a mission in North Africa for which he recruited the Baroness Aline Dessoffy. Dinklage's future missions always included a new female lover from high society who very likely was funding his endeavors. After France's defeat, Dinklage returned to Paris. Coco had met Dinklage socially many years previous to what would become their affair.
I'm
He
spotting a
was
trend with Coco.
and he was 13 years her junior.
Oh, she
Mm-hmm.
again, joie de vie. She's a bon
Joie de
vivant
vie.
here. Yeah,
Yes,
joie
but
de
she would
vie.
probably would say she was 13 years his junior.
Right, 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 right. And the band played on. People
And the
during an
band played on.
occupation, people still have their needs. Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
Von Dinklage was not sufficiently senior to be billeted at the Ritz, and it may have been elsewhere in the city that Chanel encountered him again. But whatever the circumstances of that meeting, she had sought his help in arranging the release of her nephew, Andre, who was still detained in an internment camp, remembering that Andre was the nephew's son. Spatz was unable to do this, a sign perhaps of his lack of influence, but nevertheless, Chanel embarked on her love affair with him at some point in 1941. Her maid, Germaine Demanger, who worked for Chanel from 1937 until 1966, was later outraged by suggestions that this relationship was tantamount to collaboration. Mademoiselle refused to reopen her couture house and work with the Germans, she declared in a letter she wrote defending Chanel from such accusations after her death in 1971. Um, tw yeah, okay. Um,
In the thick of
Operation
it. So
Bottom. Yeah.
she gets to stay at the Ritz, but half of the Ritz is occupied by Gehring and these other guys. Is that
Mm-hmm.
right? Okay, but
Yep.
Dinklage isn't ranked high enough to stay at the Ritz, so
No.
she's going out to meet him elsewhere, and they
Yep.
started to have an affair.
Yeah.
Okay,
Correct.
understood. I assume you're going to get to the stuff where she like actively contributes, participates in spying.
Yes.
Okay,
I am. Yes.
okay.
Okay. Let me just get myself in order here.
Yep, I know where you're at.
Okay.
You're gathering
Yep.
yourself. There you go. Yep, you got it all. It's a lot,
All
and we
right.
are heading into we started at 1. Okay, yeah, we're 3.5 hours in, Abby.
3.5
You're doing
hours.
all
Okay,
right. You're
cool.
doing all right.
All right. So, Chanel, in marked contrast, led a quiet life, avoiding social contact with the Germans apart from spats. He tended to visit her at the apartment in Rue Cambon rather than the Ritz, presumably to obey the royal rule that kept civilians separate from the military in the hotel. According to the same maid, he was a gentleman. Mademoiselle had first met him years before in Saint Moritz. He came often to see Mademoiselle at Rue Cambon, but we never saw him in a uniform. I swear that Mademoiselle never received any Germans except Baron von Dinklich. Wherever they were visited, whenever they were visited by Chanel's closest and most trusted friends, she and Spatz openly declared their loathing of the war and continued in their habit of speaking English to one another. They made several trips to La Pausa together, where they were contacted by Robert Streets, the villa's architect. He was now a member of the local resistance, and when he asked for Chanel's help in intervening on behalf of a friend, a physics professor who'd been arrested by the Gestapo, she willingly agreed. Perhaps unbeknownst to her, the resistance was also using the extensive cellars at La Pausa as a hiding place from which to send covert messages via a hidden transmitter, and its gardens as a staging post for the Jewish refugees escaping from France into the Italian border. For the most part, Chanel behaved as if Germans simply didn't exist. Uh, Marcel Heydrich, who was not afforded the opportunity of such a lofty disregard given his own detainment as a French officer in the German prisoner of war camp, nevertheless expressed some sympathy for Chanel's apparent refusal to acknowledge the enemy presence in Paris. Chanel would never have done business with Nazi dignitaries, he said, unlike others who sold jewelry to Goering. Let no one think Mademoiselle Chanel would have spoken to him or smiled. She did not see them, she declared, and I am sure she was telling the truth. That that did something to them, she told me, when a woman who still has something left ignored them completely. And yet her avoidance was far from complete. Spatz, after all, was a German, however, he tried to keep a low profile during the occupation. Nor was he the only German that Chanel had dealings with. A catastrophic error of judgment led her to become embroiled with another more senior Nazi officer, a relationship that would lead to a misguided trip to Madrid, the consequences of which were to prove markedly compromising. The catalyst for this appears not to have been Spatz, but a friend of his, Captain Theodore Mom, who had spent his childhood in Belgium, where his family ran a textile business before returning to Germany. Mom was an army officer, possibly connected to the Abwehr, and sufficiently knowledgeable to have been assigned to Paris to supervise the local textile industry under the German administration. When Spatz proved unable to get Chanel's nephew out of the prisoner of war camp, she turned to Mom for help, a painfully slow process given Andre was only released 4 years after imprisonment in Germany. But at some point, Chanel's negotiations with Mom, as the war dragged on through 1943, a bizarre plan began to take shape that she would act as a messenger to Churchill and thereby initiate a peace process. So this was called Operation Model Hut or Model Hat.
Is there an umlaut in that? Mudelhut, something? Anyway,
Yeah, probably.
Abwehr means counterintelligence.
Abwehr.
Yeah,
Okay,
Abwehr.
cool.
Yeah, it means counterintelligence. Yeah. So she's now getting mixed up in like spycraft.
Yes.
And okay, fun.
Um, yeah,
Her
when
life was
Mom went,
you know she was going to eventually meet a spy of some sort. She was going
oh
to
yeah.
eventually, it had to happen. Her destiny.
Um, when Mom went to Berlin with the proposal in the autumn of 1943, he found a receptive audience in the form of Walter Schellenberg, the Nazi chief of foreign intelligence. Schellenberg, like the Abwehr commander William Canaris, was already searching for ways of covert negotiation with the Allies, despite the fact that to do so was to risk execution by Hitler, who had forbidden any such overtures. In retrospect, when Schellenberg was interrogated by the British after the German defeat, he indicated that he had hoped Chanel might at least give Churchill a message that senior German commanders were at odds with Hitler and were seeking to end the war. And his choice of the manner by which she would do this was significant. His strategy was to send her to Madrid to meet the British ambassador, Sir Samuel Hoare, with whom she was already acquainted. Schellenberg had long nursed an ambition himself to establish contact with her, Hor, he had first conceived the idea in July 1942 and was therefore swift to settle upon Chanel as the means to move forward. The mission was codenamed Operation Model Hut. Ah, no omelette. And for all the pantomime frothiness of the title, the participants appear to have embarked upon it with serious intent. When Mom returned to Paris, the plan began to seem less clear, in part because Chanel now wanted Vera Lombardi, who we mentioned earlier, to accompany her to Madrid. Vera was still living in Rome with her husband, still living in Rome. Her husband was allegedly in hiding in southern Italy, although Italian documents locate him leading an army unit fighting Allied forces. And she needed German authorization to travel to Paris and thence to Madrid. Her version of subsequent events is at odds with Chanel's and is impossible to be certain of which of them gave a more reliable account. Vera described receiving a letter from Coco delivered to her in Rome by a German officer in which her former employer asked her to return to Paris to help her reopen the House of Chanel. She declined the invitation and 3 weeks later was arrested as a British spy. For this, she blamed Chanel, a charge subsequently leveled at Chanel by her biographer Edmond Charles-Roux. But Chanel gave a different version, in which she had acted as a faithful friend to Vera, intervening on her behalf to gain her release from prison in Rome. Whatever the correct interpretation of their motivations, the two women traveled to Madrid together. Once there, Vera was refused permission to leave Madrid and return to Italy. Her claims that she was a loyal British subject and that Chanel was an enemy spy seem not to have been given much credence by the embassy staff in Madrid, nor by Churchill's staff in London. And when one examines the letter that Chanel wrote to Churchill from Madrid, it appears to be nothing more sinister than a straightforward appeal on Vera's behalf to allow her to return home to Italy. Nor did it further the cause of Operation Model Hut, which was abandoned without really ever getting started. This was confirmed by Schellenberg's account of the plot to the British interrogators, although he adds a further layer of confusion by stating that it took place in April 1944. In fact, Chanel attempted to make contact with Churchill in early January 1944. Her maid who packed her bags for Madrid appears to have known the specific details of Chanel's itinerary and that of the British Prime Minister who had fallen ill after the Tehran conference in December 1943. Mademoiselle went to Madrid with the intention of meeting her friend Monsieur Churchill, who had agreed to see her when he came back from Tehran. She had taken with her Madame Vera Bate, who had joined her at the Ritz in Paris. They left Paris together and together went to the British Embassy in Madrid. The ambassador there was Samuel Hoare. The meeting with Churchill could not happen. He was very tired after the Tehran conference. He cancelled his appointments in Spain and went back to England after stopping in Cairo and Tunisia. So, ultimately, the mission was a failure for the Germans. British intelligence files reveal that the plan collapsed after Lombardi, on arrival in Madrid, had proceeded to denounce Chanel and the others to the British embassy as Nazi spies. In September 1944, Chanel was interrogated by the Free French Purge Committee, and the committee had no documented evidence of her collaboration activities and was obliged to release her. According to Chanel's grandniece, Gabrielle Palace-Lebrun, when Chanel returned home, she said, "Churchill had me freed." And so that really was her career as a spy.
So the Germans thought they were going to broker a peace with Churchill through
Yes.
Coco?
Yeah,
Okay.
so Spain was neutral territory at the time, and they
Hmm.
thought that they could get Coco to send a message to Churchill to meet with her in Madrid to broker this peace deal between the
And
Nazis.
and
Well,
these were
upper levels
people,
of the Nazis, but not Hitler,
but
obviously.
not the forbidden mustache, not the
Yeah,
the Austrian. Okay. Interesting. That's funny. So she was actually collaborating with Nazis to try to stop the war contra Hitler's wishes. So that's
yeah,
complicated,
super
right?
complicated.
Yeah.
And
So
it's not
like ish,
really spying because
right.
she was still her. Like, she was not
But
undercover. She
but
was obviously
but
extremely famous. Everyone would know who she was. And also, it was, I guess, not really against her own country.
Right, and she could have been killed too. I mean, if
Yeah.
she was found collaborating with these Nazis or these German officers who were going against Hitler's will, I mean, she had some either she didn't understand what she was getting into, or she was very brave, probably trying to stop the
Mm.
war. Right. So, okay.
Also, I mean, also her nephew was in a prisoner of war camp, and she needed him to be released. So
Right. Okay.
that was
Right.
another element to the story, I guess.
What were they using him as a chit to try to get her to do this, or was it more just like
I
she
don't know
wants the war to end?
because some people had said again it's this order of events thing. Some accounts had said that he had been released before she went on to do this, so I don't
Hmm.
know if it was a quid pro quo thing. I don't think they kept him there and sent her on this mission and then freed him afterwards.
I
But
see.
maybe she felt indebted to them. Maybe von Dinklage had talked her into it. I'm not sure.
Sure. Pillow talk.
Pillow
Yeah.
talk.
Yeah. All right.
Go on a little Nazi
So she
mission.
get yeah. So she gets through the war. She's had another lover.
Hmm.
She's approached by the Purge Committee. They have
Hmm.
no evidence.
Hmm.
Her reputation is maybe a little bit tarnished,
Uh-huh.
but she's not alone. She's not the only Parisienne to
Hmm.
collaborate or to sort of,
Horizontal collaborator.
right?
Hmm.
Those tall Germans come to town.
Hmm.
Um, and so now the war ends.
And so now the war ends. Um, there's a little bit more about her questioning or
Okay.
lack thereof. Um, so yes, she'd been pulled in by the FFI to be questioned, and there's much speculation about why she was quickly released at the time when other women who had consorted with the Germans, les collaboration horizontales, horizontal, uh, were savagely treated with their heads shaved and their
Yeah, they had
clothes stripped.
their heads were shaved, and yeah, they were
Yeah.
treated very, very, very sort of
Yeah, they
savagely. Yeah. Mhm.
paraded naked through the streets. They're jeering mobs. Some of them were beaten. Some of them were. I read something that some of them were branded, I think, with
Oof.
swastikas. Yeah.
Yikes.
Um, so it's generally been assumed that Churchill somehow intervened on Chanel's behalf, although a lurid conspiracy theory also circulated that her links to her, that the links to her, the links to that she had to the British royal family got her out as well because the former king, the one who married an American actress, probably not the first, definitely not the last, uh, who is now living in France, married to Wallace Simpson. I forget what his Edward the Eighth.
Don't ask me, but
Former king who was who had to stand down because he wanted to marry a divorcee. They moved to France. He was famous for having pro-Nazi sympathies,
mm,
and Chanel was acquainted with him. They were friends. She used to make clothes for Wallace Simpson, the wife, and so a lot of people believed that the intervention on her behalf was because she could use that knowledge as a bargaining chip, I guess.
sure. I mean, she does seem to be at a level of power and influence and status and wealth that she could probably wriggle her way out of having her hair shorn and being
Hmm.
paraded through the streets. I mean, not is it fair? I don't know.
Yeah,
But it is what it is. And again, she's buried in Switzerland, so
she's been.
no, I don't know.
um, on the day of the liberation, she made the calculated and rather, I guess, cynical gesture of running out into the streets and handing free bottles of Chanel No. 5 to the American GIs to give to to give to their girlfriends, celebrating. um, you know, the French liberation.
You got to go where the wind blows sometimes. Sometimes you got to listen. Sometimes you got to look out for number one, number two, number three, number four, and number five.
And number
You got
five.
to look out for yourself sometimes.
Yeah.
That's true. I mean, and again, we're talking about a survivor here. I mean, so,
Yes.
and I don't personally look to my perfumers and my fashion designers for a moral compass. So, you know, it's just an interesting muddy period of time. I mean, like look, you told a story where she was working with some high-ranking German intelligence officers to try to bring an early end to the war against Hitler's wishes. So okay, like where does that situate her in the history of the war and everything? I mean, nothing
Yeah.
is that black and white, and we don't do apologia for the subjects we cover on this pod. Like I never apologize for like Brando and how monstrous he was. The show is the
Mm.
show, and when we come up to that war. It always gets interesting. So, Abby, thank you for delicately walking us through Coco Chanel's horizontal collaboration. And that phrase is going into
Well,
my yeah.
I would like to just quickly remind you that that these were not her only transgressions during World War II.
Okay, okay, fair enough.
In 1941, she made the callous and opportunistic move to have the Wertheimers, the Jewish brothers that owned the majority stake of her of Le Parfums Chanel, removed as the owners of the company under the Aryan laws. And again, we will be covering that in the After Dark.
That is
Uh,
that is pretty cynical. And well, we'll talk about it on the After Dark. So I'm very
mhm.
curious to hear how she did that. Can you imagine if they passed laws saying, "Hey, if your business partners are this ethnic background, you know, you can just apply to have their ownership
Them
stripped from
removed.
them."
Yeah.
Like, whoa, that is gnarly. Yeah, that's pretty real. All right, cool. Well, I can't wait for the After Dark, Abby. Now I know she lives until 1971,
Yeah.
so she's got a few more years on her here.
She
But I feel
does
like
have a
we're
few more
we're on
years.
the back nine here, Abby,
Yeah.
and I'm really enjoying it. I love doing this show. I love learning about these figures. It's she's such an interesting arc again, from like nothing to like Churchill, the
To
king,
Churchill.
the
Yeah.
ex-king, living in the Ritz. I mean, she was like in history, very in history, and taking $1 million to go to Hollywood to
Yeah.
do costumes. I mean, just from nothing to the very top. Very cool. Yeah, go on.
Absolutely. So at this point, she's not particularly popular in Paris because people know about her living at the Ritz and, her being brought in for questioning and definitely assumed some things. So in 1945, she moved to Switzerland, where she lived for several years. Part of that time with the German lover Dinklage. When their relationship ended, he moved to a Balearic island, although Chanel continued to send him a monthly allowance. So this is another man that she's supporting. According to Pierre Galland, those who knew the Baron remember him as an impoverished, aging playboy who nevertheless managed to keep up the pretense of wealth and fun-loving youth. Switzerland had also provided a refuge for Walter Schellenberg, who was seriously ill with liver disease. After his interrogation in London, Hitler's chief of foreign intelligence had returned to Germany for the Nuremberg trials. Schellenberg later described his interrogation as harsh, telling a lawyer in Nuremberg that after the sessions in London, I was finished. 8 weeks in a lightless cell, I wanted to kill myself. The final report into Schellenberg's testimony, written by MI5 officers, revealed something of his interrogator's frustrations. His incoherence and incapability of producing lucid verbal or written statements have rendered him a more difficult subject to interrogate than other subjects of inferior education and humbler status. His wartime record was equally difficult to interpret, for Schellenberg had not only tried to initiate peace negotiations with the Allies, as was evident in the ill-fated Operation Model Hut, and thereby signal his disaffection with Hitler. But he had also been involved in the successful attempts to save thousands from concentration camps in the final months of the war. There were those who saw this as an act of pure self-interest, an attempt to rehabilitate his reputation in the certain knowledge of German defeat. Others were more sympathetic. A Swedish diplomat who negotiated the release of over 20,000 prisoners from the German camps and who testified on Schellenberg's behalf in the Nuremberg trials had said. Schellenberg himself seemed confident that he would not be judged harshly by the Allies, at least when he was first interrogated in July 1945. An early intelligence report observed that he was facing his present plight as a prisoner in the Allied hands in the spirit of complete realism. This does not mean that the thought of my fate may befall him. The fact that Schellenberg seems to be possessed by a certain amount of good faith and Allied goodwill is due to his conviction that he has, ever since becoming conscious in 1940 that Germany had lost the war, been striving for settlement with the Western powers and for an improvement of the lot of Allied national soldiers and civilians in German hands. In the event, though, Schellenberg first appeared at the Nuremberg trials as a witness for the prosecution. He was later indicted for war crimes and found guilty. On April the 14th, 1949, he was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment, but the time spent in custody from June 1945 was taken into account and set against his sentence. By this point, Schellenberg was judged too ill with liver and gallbladder problems to be kept in prison and was instead held in Nuremberg City Hospital. In March 1950, he was released under a medical pardon. As his health continued to deteriorate, so did his precarious finances. When he was well enough to write, Schellenberg worked on his memoirs, entitled appropriately The Labyrinth. The following year, in May 1951, one of his wartime contacts, Roger Masson, the head of Swiss military intelligence, arranged for him to come under the care of a local doctor in Switzerland. Lang, the local doctor, covered his medical expenses for several months, but eventually, as these mounted, Schellenberg was forced to look elsewhere for financial help. Professor Reinhard R. Dories, a leading authority on German intelligence and an expert on Schellenberg's activities, has recounted the subsequent events. Schellenberg contacted Coco Chanel and explained his dire financial problems. If the doctor remembered correctly, the lady of haute couture arrived in a black Mercedes, curtains drawn, and gave Schellenberg about 30,000 Swiss francs. There are no other explanations from the doctor other than the fact that during the war, Schellenberg had been helpful to her and others in the fashion world. Schellenberg died in 1952 at the age of 42, and his posthumously published memoir made no mention of Coco Chanel.
Interesting. Fascinating character. He was the head of intelligence for the Third Reich, so no
Mhm.
slouch. Wow, she was really in it. She was dragged into the highest reaches of
Yeah,
things.
and managing to bribe her way out of well, she did like to rewrite history.
She's a little
She was
slippery little eel
rewriting it on
here.
all the
Yep,
little memoirs were getting
sure.
changed
I
by Coco Chanel.
I don't blame her at all for trying to survive and hold on to her legacy too. And this is that quality of somebody who knows what nothing is.
hmm
And so yeah, I really don't blame her for doing what she has to do to sort of survive and protect her legacy. Very interesting.
A few years later, unlike the pre-war era when women reigned as the premier courtiers, Christian Dior achieved success in 1947 with his new look, and a lot of male designers received recognition. Dior, Cristobal Balenciaga, Robert Piguet, and Jacques Feth. Chanel was convinced that women would ultimately rebel against the aesthetic favored by the men, and what she called illogical design: the waist cinches, padded bras, heavy skirts, and the stiffened jackets. At more than 70 years old, after having her couture house closed for 15 years, she felt the time was right for her to re-enter the fashion world. When Chanel came out with her comeback collection in 1954, the French press were cautious due to her collaboration during the war and the controversy of the collection. Um, But Chanel faced the critics with her lips and nails in brave war paint. Crimson is the dress that she had made the previous year for her friend Marie-Helene de Rothschild out of a taffeta curtain. It had been an improvised evening gown, according to Marie-Helene, and nevertheless a dazzling success, so widely admired that Marie-Helene claimed it was this red dress that had convinced Chanel to go back into business again. And when she did so, it was with full-blooded conviction, observed Bettina Ballard, who had returned to Paris to report on the show as the fashion editor of American Vogue. The French fashion the French fashion press lay in wait for her first post-war collection like cats at a rat hole, observed Ballard, who was close enough to Chanel to know that she'd worked on it tirelessly, despite being sick with a stoppage in her intestine. She sat at the top of her stairs with a handful of close friends, watching the faces of the spectators in the mirrors, knowing that they had come with closed minds and venomous pens. The blast in the press the next day was blindly violent, as if the fashion writers could in some way deny the strength of this voice from the past by ranting and raving. Their attack only served to warm her fighting blood. The reviews were savage enough to have felled a woman less sure of herself. Perhaps the French critics would have sneered at whatever it was that Chanel produced as punishment for her wartime past. But when she revealed a collection that seemed to be a revival of the clothes that had once looked radical, easy, fluid, the very antithesis of Dior's corseting, they saw it as tired repetition and therefore a failure to engage with fashion. Laure dismissed the show as a sad retrospective, a resurrection of past fashions that dated back even further than Chanel's final collection in 1939, with suits in rather dull wools, a wan black, matched joylessly with melancholy prints. The models had the figure of 1930, no breasts, no waist, no hips. Le Figaro was patronizing. It was touching. You had a feeling that you were back in 1925. But a columnist in combat was even harsher, hinting at the gossip about Chanel's facelift and condemning her collection as ghosts of 1930s things, in which the audience saw not the future, but a disappointing reflection of the past, into which a pretentious little black figure was disappearing with giant steps. The British newspapers were no less condemnatory. The Daily Express and pronounced it a fiasco. The Daily Mail called it a flop.
Oh no, and this is 54.
Yeah, this is 54. 70 years old.
That's tough to take. That'll knock
Mm-hmm.
you for a loop too. Yeah. I mean, she gets to put her head down on a pillow of money, but I mean, at those reaches, the money isn't what you're so concerned about. I mean, you are, but
Mm.
like you want status and legacy and this Christian Dior and this, these guys, they don't know what they're doing. I'm Coco Chanel. I'm going to tell you, I made black happen.
I
Like,
made black happen.
yeah, that must be hard. Yeah.
However, the American press saw it as a breakthrough, bringing together fashion and youth in a new way. This same editor of the US Vogue remains loyal to Chanel and featured the model Marie-Helene Arnaud, the face of Chanel in the 1950s, in the March 1954 issue. Photographed by Henry Clark wearing three outfits, a red dress with a V-neck paired with ropes of pearls, a tiered seersucker evening gown, and a navy jersey mid-calf suit. She wore this outfit with its slightly padded square-shouldered cardigan jacket, two patch pockets, and sleeves that unbuttoned back to reveal crisp white cuffs, above a white muslin blouse with a perky collar and bow that stayed perfectly in place with small tabs that buttoned onto the waistline of an easy A-line skirt. Ballard had bought the suit herself, which gave an overwhelming impression of youthful elegance, and orders for the clothing that Arnaud had modeled soon poured in from the US. Which is where we get into the age of celebrity Chanel. So,
Cool. No, I'm digging it. She's in the fullness of life here, 70 years old and
70 years old.
rich. Yeah, rich.
Hollywood royalty increasingly favored Chanel, including Grace Kelly, Lauren Bacall, Elizabeth Taylor, and Marlene Dietrich, who'd first worn Chanel in 1933. The publicity in turn boosted the sales of the perfumes, and though perhaps the biggest coup of all came courtesy of Marilyn Monroe. When the film star was asked in an interview what she wore at night, she replied in an apparently unpremeditated line that did more than a multi-million-dollar advertising campaign, Chanel number 5.
Friend of the pod, Marilyn Monroe, who had another childhood that I would put right next to Coco's.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, rough one.
rough. Um, While America embraced Chanel, it was no wonder that she spoke so warmly of its citizens. When she met John Fairchild at the same time as dismissing the French, as if punishing them for the savaging she had received for her comeback collection. Chanel launched into a tirade against the French. How mean, how hard, how awful Paris was today. American women were the most beautiful. The Americans were the only ones who understood her. They also honored her, hence her trip to Dallas in September 1957 to receive a fashion award at the most influential designer of the 20th as the most influential designer of the 20th century from Stanley Marcus, the owner of the department store Neiman Marcus. On her way back from Texas, she was interviewed by Lillian Ross of The New Yorker, who seemed unusually smitten. We've met some formidable charmers in our time, wrote Ross, but none to surpass the great courtier and perfumer Mademoiselle Gabrielle Chanel, who came out of retirement 3 years ago to present a collection of dress and suit designs that have begun to affect women's styles every bit as powerfully as her designs of the 30 odd years ago. At 74, Mademoiselle Chanel is sensationally good looking, with dark brown eyes, a brilliant smile, and the unquenchable vitality of a 20-year-old. And when giving us a firm handshake, she said, I am très fatiguée. It was with the assurance of a woman who knows she can afford to say it.
We could say très fatigué.
Très fatiguée.
Yeah, it rhymes.
Yeah.
That we can do because it rhymes. You're doing great, Abby. Bring us home. Bring us home.
Okay. Since the Chanel look is causing such a stir these days, we took a particular note of what the Piguetta was wearing. A natural colored straw sailor hat, a natural colored silk suit, and a box jacket and straight skirt, a white silk blouse with gold cufflinks, low-heeled brown and white shoes, and plenty of jewelry. A pearl hat pin, pearls and diamonds in her ears, ropes of pearls around her neck, and on her jacket an enormous brooch of antique gold studded with rubies, emeralds, and diamonds. The brooch is of my design and the dress is nothing. Très simple, she said. The cufflinks were given to me by Stravinsky 30 years ago. The occasion, admiration, of course. The admiration I bore him. Chanel did not put a foot wrong in the interview with Ross. Her answers in English were as well judged as her perfectly cut sleeves. Indeed, her performance was as graceful as the most skilled celebrity who knows how to shine in the limelight without looking vain. Her composure maintained even when Ross asked her why she had happened to be in retirement for so long. Her brown eyes flashed. Never was I really in retirement in my heart, she said. I always observed the new clothes. At last, quietly, calmly, with great determination, I began working on une belle collection. When I showed it in Paris, I had many critics. They said that I was old-fashioned, that I was no longer of the age. Always I was smiling inside my head, and I thought, I will show them.
Right on. Cool. That's what I said. Spark plug.
Spark plug. Uh,
And born in 1883, did we say? And now
yes.
the Beatles? I mean, Marilyn Monroe, the Beatles. I mean, 50s to 60s. She lives to see all of that. Crazy.
Yeah.
Kennedy.
Well, and you just segued nicely into the next story that I was going to tell.
It's easy to do because there are only 25,000 people at any given time. And if you're keyed in like I am, you can guess what's coming next. Yeah. Interlink,
Okay.
interlink, Monroe,
Interlink.
Kennedy, Monroe, interlink.
Jacqueline Kennedy, former First Lady, was a regular couture customer at Rue Cambon between the years of 1955 and 1968. But once her husband, John F. Kennedy, became president, she was only allowed to wear American designers. A diplomatic solution was reached whereby Mrs. Kennedy was able to acquire Chanel outfits sewn for her in New York by a dressmaking establishment called Chez Ninon. The garments were not fake or pirated, but made to order using materials supplied by Chanel in Paris. And Mrs. Kennedy did not save money by doing so. The prices at Chez Nanon were on par with those at Chanel, with a suit starting at $850 and evening gowns running into the thousands. But she did save face as an implicitly patriotic patron of the American dressmaker. Thus, it came to be that she was wearing a vivid pink Chanel suit, complete with fabric, trim, and buttons from 31 Rue Cambon, but fitted at Chez Ninon on the 22nd of November,
Oh
1963, accompanying her husband to
no.
Dallas.
Oh, that was a Chanel suit.
Yep.
Too soon.
It was not the first time that the president's wife had worn the suit, of which the original had come from the Chanel Autumn Winter 1961 couture collection. Mrs. Kennedy had been seen in it on several previous occasions, including a visit to London in 1962, and it was said to be a particular favorite of her husband's. In a subsequent interview with the writer William Manchester, Mrs. Kennedy recalled how the president, shortly before their trip to Dallas, had for the first time in their marriage asked what she planned to wear. There were going to be all these rich Republican women at that lunch, JFK told her, wearing mink coats and diamond bracelets. You've got to look as marvelous as any of them. Be simple, show these Texans what good taste really is. So she tramped in and out of his room, holding dresses in front of her. The outfits finally chosen, weather permitting, were all veterans of her wardrobe. Beige and white dresses, blue and yellow suits, and for Dallas, a pink suit with a navy blue collar and a matching pink pillbox hat. When the first couple arrived on Air Force One at Dallas Love Field Airport, Mrs. Kennedy was given a bunch of red roses. The few surviving color photographs show her looking radiant in the pink suit, the flowers in full bloom in her arms. The November sky blew beyond the wings of the airplane. Afterwards, riding behind her husband in an open limousine as the presidential motorcade traveled through Dallas, her husband asked her to remove her dark glasses because the crowd had come to see her face. The vice president's wife, Lady Bird Johnson, was following two cars behind the Kennedys with her husband, Lyndon Johnson. Later, she wrote in her diary that the sunlit streets were lined with people. One last happy moment I had was looking up and seeing Mary Griffith leaning out a window waving at me. Mary had for many years been in charge of altering the clothes I had purchased at Neiman Marcus. Then she heard a shot and two more in rapid succession. At first, she thought these were the sounds of celebratory firecrackers, but as her car accelerated, she heard someone say, "Have they shot the president?" When they pulled up outside a hospital, she was hustled into the building by the Secret Service agents. I cast one last look over my shoulder and I saw the president's car, a bundle of pink, just like a drift of blossoms, lying in the back seat. It was Mrs. Kennedy lying over the president's body. After the president was declared dead and his body taken in a casket to Air Force One, wrote Mrs. Johnson. She stood beside her husband as he took the oath of office on board the aircraft. Jackie Kennedy was also there, her hair falling in her face but very composed. I looked at her. Mrs. Kennedy's dress was stained with blood. One leg was almost entirely covered with it, and her right glove was caked. And it was caked with blood, her husband's blood. Somehow that was one of the most poignant sights, that immaculate woman exquisitely dressed and caked in blood. I asked her if I couldn't get someone in to help her change, and she said, "Oh no." And then with an almost with an element of fierceness, as if a person that gentle, that dignified can be said to have such a quality, she said, "I want them to see what they've done to Jack." Jacqueline Kennedy kept the same suit on, still stained with her husband's blood, when Air Force One returned with his coffin to Washington, and did not remove it until early the next morning. When she finally changed out of her suit, the maid folded it and put it in a box. A few days later, the box was sent to Mrs. Kennedy's mother, who wrote November 22nd, 1963 on the top and placed it in her attic. Eventually, the suit was given to the National Archives for safekeeping, where it remains stored away from the public view. It has never been cleaned.
Oh, isn't that's heavy, isn't it? Oof. I know, right? Too soon. Terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Thanks for going through that.
I don't know
Yeah.
why I'm crying.
Because you're doing an Art of Darkness episode. I've become verklempt on this show before. 100%. That's a heavy, heavy thing. And then to think of this orphan this little orphan girl from France has made her way to the point where she's dressing the first lady in this incredibly historic moment. I had no idea that was a Chanel design.
Well, disappointingly.
Uh,
Mademoiselle Chanel did not comment on the blood-stained pink suit, although
mm,
several years later, after Jack Kennedy's death, she was sharp-tongued on the subject of his widow, telling James Brady at Women's Wear Daily that she disapproved of Jackie Kennedy wearing miniskirts. She wears her daughter's clothes, the Oracle had spoken, but afterwards she worried aloud to Marcel Heydrich, the editor of Marie Claire, that she might have gone too far. But then Chanel reassured herself that she was right, as always. When one makes up one's mind to tell the truth, one has to go all the way.
yeah, the whereabouts of the hat today are unknown. Several people asked Kennedy whether she would like to change her suit, but she refused. When Lady Bird offered to send someone to help her, she responded, "Oh no, I want them to see what they have done to Jack." Crazy. Wow. Okay, well, I'm never
Yeah.
going to look at that suit the same way. People have described it as one of those indelible images Americans had stored Jackie in the bloodstained pink Chanel suit, the most legendary garment in American history. Be like
hmm
our Shroud of Turin and emblematic
and
of the ending of Innocence.
and it's in that Simpsons episode.
Oh, which that the most important thing.
Marge Simpson finds a pink Chanel suit at a at like a secondhand store, and she wears it, and she instantly makes friends with some like women in a like a country club, and she's
Ah,
invited to go to the country club with them, and she has to keep refashioning the Chanel suit into different items of clothing because she couldn't turn up in the same suit every day.
I see. I see. To keep up with the club ladies. Fun.
Yeah, but it was
All right.
exactly the same as Jackie Kennedy's pink Chanel suit.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. We're close to the end, aren't we?
We're getting there.
All right.
Um,
And then we've got more for you on the After Dark. Abby and I are going long
yeah,
today. What time is it in the UK? It's got to be 11 o'clock, right?
it is 11:15.
All right, Abby. You're doing all right. Keep it up.
Okay. Um, from the time of her comeback collection in 1954, Chanel was almost always seen with a hat on her head, the jaunty little straw boater of her youth. Some speculated she wore the hat to hide the thinning of her hair in old age. Others say that it was a way of concealing the scars of her facelift. But to those who remained closest to her, Gabrielle Lebrune, her great niece, and Claude Delay, she still she still saw the dignity of which she carried herself, the unyielding efforts to keep her proud head held high. Both of them were young enough to remain admiring of Chanel, at the same time being sensitive to the older woman's vulnerabilities. Both saw her emotional scars, her loneliness, her sense of loss and failure at having never married, never born children. After Gabrielle married and had her own two sons, this is the great niece, Chanel spent time with them, never overly tender. She nevertheless gave them picture books and took the trouble to talk to them and to listen to their answers in ways that she did not always do with adults. My son Guillaume remembers that she always wore a lot of makeup and kept her hat on her head, says Gabrielle. One day when she was at her apartment, a piece of crystal fell from the chandelier in the salon. He put it in the mouth of Auntie Coco's gold frog. Last time I looked, it was still there. Sometimes, says Gabrielle, her aunt would tell her, a simple life with a husband and children, a life with people you love, that is the real life. And yet Gabrielle could also see the manner in which Chanel had cut her own familial ties to set herself free. She battled for her freedom to escape from her childhood, from the suffering of Overzine, and that was why she designed clothes that made women free. It was all a question of freedom, to be free to drive your car, to ride a bicycle, to walk to work. You had to be able to forget about what you were wearing. Forgetting is a part of freedom, and so she was free to forget her past. And even if she did not forget it, she put her memories somewhere where they did not weigh too heavily on her. Just like the clothes she made, they were so light that they seemed to weigh nothing at all. Claude Delay, her confidant, was similarly aware of what Chanel had cut out of her past. But while others have accused Chanel of lying in order to recreate history and her own identity, Delay is less judgmental, seeing the revisions as Chanel's attempt to be true to herself. I remember Coco cutting bits out of a typed page of maxims she'd written and making them into thin strips for me. I watched the remains getting smaller and smaller. That's how you arrive at a text. She exercised the same rigor towards human beings. Her rigor had far reaching consequences: isolation, solitude. There were times when Delay sat with Chanel in the apartment at Rue Cambon long after everyone else had gone, sensing the couture's spirit sinking as darkness fell, scissors set aside. It was at these moments that Chanel would say that her life was a failure, and that she had lost those whom she'd adored, that there was nothing worse than being alone, that all that was left to her were dresses and coats. A woman who is not loved is no woman, she said to Delay, whatever her age. A woman needs to be looked at by a man who loves her. Without that look, she dies. Um, okay. In the last years of her life, Chanel continued to work despite her declining health. She was known to be increasingly reclusive, irritable, and demanding, often expressing dissatisfaction with the world around her. Friends and associates noted that she'd grown tired and melancholic, reflecting on a life full of both triumphs and controversies. Chanel had been a habitual morphine user since the 1930s and continued until her death in 1971. Her longtime maid and confidant, Celeste Albaret, stated that Chanel took daily injections, often administered by doctors or assistants. Her dependency was an open secret among those in her inner circle. She supposedly used it to help her sleep or to alleviate anxiety. In 1970, she was still overseeing her fashion house and working on her collections, but age and exhaustion were catching up with her. She often complained of feeling unwell, but refused to slow down, maintaining the same rigid work ethic she'd followed all her life. On the day before her death, the 9th of January 1971, Mademoiselle Chanel was still working, even though it was a Saturday, furiously racing against the clock to finish her last couture collection. The following morning, she was forced to remain at rest. Even the formidable Chanel could not insist that her employees go to work on a Sunday. Claude Delay came to visit her at the Ritz at 1 o'clock, where she found her sitting at a dressing table again, applying her makeup, carefully drawing on her dark eyebrows and red lipstick, examining her reflection in the mirror. They lunched together downstairs at Chanel's usual table, out of the way, where she could watch the others in the restaurant without being watched herself, and then long after the room had emptied, the two women finally left for an afternoon drive. The car drove them up to the Champs-Élysées, crammed with a gloomy crowd, remembers Delay, and through the streets of Paris while a wintry sunshine finally emerged through the mist. Chanel told Delay that she hated the setting sun, that she should have worn her dark glasses. By the time the car had brought them back to the Ritz, the sun had disappeared and a full moon was rising. Delay said goodbye, and Chanel disappeared through the door of the Ritz. She called out that she would be working at Rue Cambon as usual the next day. Mademoiselle Chanel took the lift back to her bedroom on the 6th floor, and her maid Celine was waiting for her. She was tired, she said to Celine, and laid down on her bed, still fully clothed, not wanting her maid to undress her. At about 8:30 p.m., she suddenly cried out to Celine that she couldn't breathe, asking her to open the window. The maid rushed to her mistress's bedside, trying to help her, as Chanel was struggling to give herself her injection. Celine broke the vial of drugs, and then Mademoiselle pushed the syringe into her hip. You see, she said to Celine, this is how one dies. The next morning, Chanel's body lay in her white bedroom at the Ritz. Her maid had dressed her in a white suit and blouse and tucked her hands beneath the linen sheets. She looked very small, says Delay, almost like a little girl taking her first communion. The funeral service was at the L'Église de la Madeleine, the grandest church close to Rue Cambon, famous for its monumental portico of stone colonnades. Her coffin was set beneath the statue of Mary Magdalene and covered with white flowers, camellias, gardenias, orchids, azaleas, some formed into a cross, others into the shape of scissors, except for a single wreath of red roses from Digliev. Uh, 1 second.
I can hear you turning your pages.
Yeah. Oh, no, Digli of the Impresario would have approved. Sorry, he died a long time ago. As would Misha, Amicia, with her instinct for the making of drama and myth. Yves Saint Laurent came to pay his respects, as did his fellow courtiers Balmain, Balenciaga, and Courageous. So many of her friends and lovers were dead. She had outlived Pierre Reverdy by a decade, and Cocteau had died over 7 years previous. But Serge Lefort was at the church, along with Jean Moreau, Salvador Dali, and all of her models, a long line of them wearing immaculate couture. 2 weeks later, the same models appeared in Mademoiselle's last couture show in ivory tweed suits and white evening dresses. Many of those in the audience found their eyes drawn to the steps of the top of the mirrored staircase where Mademoiselle used to sit, hidden from view, still hidden from them now. She was not buried in Paris, but in Switzerland, as she'd requested, in the cemetery in Lausanne. There is a headstone with 5 lions carved on it, her name above the dates of her birth and her death, and a simple cross. But the grave itself is covered with white flowers rather than a heavy tomb. She did not want to be buried beneath a stone monument, says Gabrielle Lebrun. She said to me, I want to be able to move, not lie under a stone. She paused and then said, you know, if you want to be close to a person who has died, you'll never find them in a graveyard. In Switzerland in the long winter of 1946, Gabrielle Chanel had told Paul Morand that she was free as a bird. 30 years later, as Morand himself approached death, he transcribed her words in his book Les Allures de Chanel. Nothing was written by me, he wrote in the preface. It was all written by a ghost, but a ghost who from beyond the grave kept up a frantic gallop. These were then her last words to him. I would make a very bad dead person, because once I was put under, I would grow restless, and I would only think of returning to earth and starting all over again. As a final irony for a woman who spent her life meticulously crafting her legend and identity, Coco Chanel's death certificate would read Gabrielle Chasnel, the name that was recorded on her birth certificate. Perhaps no matter who you become, you can't escape who you are. Coco Chanel's legacy is one of enduring influence, not just in fashion, but in shaping the modern woman's sense of independence and elegance. She revolutionized style by rejecting the restrictive corsetry of the 19th century in favor of sleek, comfortable, and effortlessly chic designs, introducing staples like the little black dress, the Chanel suit, and the quilted handbag. Chanel No. 5 remains one of the world's most iconic perfumes, a testament to her ability to build luxury with simplicity. Her ability to capture the spirit of the times ensured that her brand remained relevant, outlasting trends and transforming into a symbol of timeless sophistication. Beyond fashion, Chanel left an imprint on culture, art, and identity, collaborating with figures like Jean Cocteau and Sergei Diaghilev, and influencing everything from ballet costumes to theatrical design. She was also, as the New York Times said in 2011, a wretched human being, anti-Semitic, homophobic, social climbing, opportunistic, ridiculously snobbish, and given to the sins of phrase making, like, if blonde, use blue perfume. She was addicted to morphine and actively collaborated with the Germans during the Nazi occupation of Paris. Despite this, her visionary approach to style and branding solidified Chanel as one of the most powerful and enduring names in fashion. Today, the House of Chanel, once a reflection of her personal taste and ambition, continues to thrive as a global empire, its interlocking double C logo instantly recognizable as a mark of luxury, rebellion, and refinement. Although her former lover, Pierre Reverdy, died 10 years before Coco in 1960, he wrote a poem towards the end of his life that is oddly fitting for the end of hers. Dear Coco, here it is, the best of my hand and the best of me. I offer it thus to you, with my heart, with my hand, before heading towards the dark road's end. If condemned, if pardoned, know you are loved. And that was the life of Coco Chanel.
The life and the work of Coco Chanel. And good job, Abby. You only have 5 more of those to do this year. All right. Very, very, very good. According to
Yeah.
reports, I've got a couple of things and then we'll tease After Dark and then get out of here. Take a quick break and then come back for the After Dark. I know you've got some juicy stuff for us. Uh, Chanel number five sells approximately 10 million bottles a year still.
Oh my gosh.
Crazy. I mean, you're talking about, that's a lot of money.
That
When
is
Jacqueline,
an
Mhm.
extraordinary amount of money, knowing how
That
much
is a
that costs.
lot of money. Yeah.
Yeah.
When Jackie Kennedy finally removed her suit, her maid folded it. I think you may have said this and placed it in a
Mhm.
box. Some days after the assassination, the box was dispatched to Kennedy's mother, who wrote November 22nd, 1963. I just think this is fascinating. Eventually, the box was given to the National Archive, and there's a note on it that says Jackie's suit and bag worn November 22nd, 1963. The suit, which was never cleaned, as you mentioned, is kept out of public view in an acid free container in a windowless room. The precise location is kept secret. The temperature hovers between 65 and 68 degrees, or 18 degrees and 20 degrees Celsius for you. The humidity is 40%. The air is changed 6 times an hour. That's how they keep that suit.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So, part of history. A
A big
messy
part
part
of
of history.
history.
Very good, Abby. Your first core episode, really, I think, well done. I really enjoyed it. That went long. I'm glad it did. We have another hour for patrons. If you want to support us, please consider going to patreon.com/art of dark
Well,
pod so you can get the bonus stuff.
in the tradition of the podcast, I have to
Oh,
ask you,
yeah.
Kevin,
One more
what would
question.
Coco Chanel be doing today?
Yeah, our closing question. Oh, man. Thinking about her in her prime, what she would be gravitating toward today. Man, it's so hard to say. Let me think. Because I don't know fashion very well. It's not my um, my arena. And is there room for somebody to come along and disrupt fashion the way that she did now today? I don't
Hmm.
know. Would she be looking, because when you think about what she did, I mean, she was simultaneously a snob, but also like made things more accessible to
Hmm.
people. There's almost like a weird kind of flattening of things where I don't know. I really don't know. Let me think. I really want to give you a good answer here. Um, I mean, I do think like knowing what her passion was and knowing that she was like really interested in clothes and clothing and fashion. I would have to say she'd probably still be doing that. I, you know,
Mm.
I always want to go, maybe she'd get into the internet and she'd be doing stuff online. But I mean, you could also imagine she might like, this question is always funny because what Coco are we getting? Are we getting the 60-year-old Coco or are we getting the
Mm.
20-year-old Coco? I definitely think she'd be hanging out with men. I think
Yes.
she'd have a
She did
lover.
like the men.
She really clearly liked the men. So I think she'd definitely have a lover. It's hard to place her anywhere but Paris. For some reason,
Mm.
there's a part of me that thinks that it would be interesting to see what she would do if she went into another area of design. Like, what would a
Right.
video game look like designed by Coco Chanel? Do you know what I'm saying? Like, as crazy as that sounds, like that's the arena where a lot of heat is, where a lot of newness is being born. So I wonder
Mm.
what would look like if she created like an indie game or something. I don't know. I'm just spitballing here. What do you think? What do you think she'd be doing, Abby?
Oh, God, I actually have no idea.
I know she's kind
Um,
of hard to pin down. Yeah.
I mean, aside from calling me a liar right now and saying something disparaging about what I'm wearing,
Yeah,
maybe.
she would
Um,
definitely be like fabricating her own story. That's
yes,
for sure. Yeah.
fabricating her own story,
Yeah.
but also she was just wildly rich as well. Like as when we get into it in the After Dark, uh, she ends up on a very generous stipend, and all her expenses taken care of for the rest of her life. So,
I think the
uh,
short answer before we tease the after dark and then take a break, the short answer is whatever the hell she wants.
whatever the hell she wants. Yeah,
That's what Coco Chanel would be doing. And
yeah.
remind us one more time for the patrons who come back, what are you gonna talk about on the after dark?
So the After Dark is titled Le Querelle de Chanel, and it is her feuds with her contemporaries. The designers are Poiret, Schiaparelli, Dior, and her business partners, the Wertheimers.
Okay. Chanel's feuds for patrons, and I'm preparing Hunter S. Thompson for next month, and then we're going to be in London doing the live show at Verderin. Tickets are on sale now. And then Abby, who are you preparing next? Are you doing Spike
Spike
Milligan,
Milligan,
the poet,
the poet.
who
Yes.
I know zero about, and so I'm excited. I get to come in knowing zero, and I can't wait to bring Hunter S. Thompson to everybody. We've got some nice dark rooms lined up. It's going to be a good time. Please come back for the After Dark and hear Abby finish her first core episode. Why am I crying?
Au
Because
revoir.
it's a moving story. I don't know. All right, Abby. We'll see you in a bit.
Okay.